Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the County Council Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. If the alarm sounds at any point, I will adjourn the meeting and we will make our way downstairs and out of the main entrance and turn left, and the muster point is at the far end of the building. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. So Michelle.
I have apologies from Councillor Corney, and Councillor Costello is substituting, Councillor MacDonald and Councillor Atkins is substituting, and Councillor Wilson and Councillor Slatter is substituting.
Thank you very much. Then any disclosable pecuniary interest. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I see no indications, but if there is at any point anybody wishes to declare anything, it's quite possible to do that during the meeting. The next item on the agenda is the minutes and the action log. I think I'll take the minutes first. Are there any comments for accuracy only on the minutes? Also, does anyone know what the beeping is? That's fine, thank you. I don't see any comments on the minutes. We will move to the action log, and I think there's going to be a comment from the Chief Executive before we take that item.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Can I just say, in respect to the action log, I'd like to thank Councillors Count and Goldsack for bringing to my attention three particular actions currently proposed for closure in the action log today. Having reviewed all of those actions, I'm minded to, with members' consent, amend the log today to show that these actions are still in progress rather than being recommended for closure. I have also discussed this with the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee in advance of today's meetings. The three actions I'm proposing to reopen and instead show as in progress are in the action log 151, which relates to the Integrated Financial Monitoring Report. That followed a debate and discussion by members at the last meeting relating to a proposed amendment in respect of reserves and presentation of reserves by the Council. In my view, that has been partly progressed but not fully closed. Therefore, I would suggest to members that needs to revert to committee in our December meeting, and will also need to fall into the financial year-end work, given it relates to reserves as well. So that would be the first action I'd propose to show as in progress rather than closed. The second relates to action 153, which is in respect of our energy projects. Members will recall that the action proposed, or the action determined by committee, was that a report would go to the newly formed Assets and Procurement Committee. That matter was referenced in the first set of reports to the Assets and Procurement Committee, but was not a full report in its own right to consider all of those implications. Accordingly, I have instructed the Executive Director for Place and Sustainability to address that and ensure that a specific report is added to the forward plan for Assets and Procurement Committee, dealing with all of those issues around the energy project. I'll come on to the second, which also relates to work for the Assets and Procurement Committee, and then there's a point I would want to make about both of those as well. So the third action, the second one relating to the Assets and Procurement Committee, members will recall at the last meeting of this committee, we discussed the This Land Annual Business Plan and Monitoring Update. As part of that discussion, members agreed that there would be a formal debate and consideration of whether or not the shareholder agreement would be made public. That was referred on to the Assets and Procurement Committee for consideration explicitly. Again, in my view, whilst issues relating to this land may have been touched on at the initial meeting of the new Assets and Procurement Committee, I think it's important a formal report is received by the committee to satisfy that action. In terms of actions 153 and 157, which both relate to reports being considered by the Assets and Procurement Committee, I also think it's incumbent on officers to ensure that not only have those reports being considered there, but the outcome of those reports being considered is fed back across to the action log for this meeting, which has originated those decisions. So, Chair, in respect to those three actions, I'm therefore proposing this morning that instead of what you have presented in the written papers, that we would show those as currently in progress with relevant reports and further updates to come, either through the Assets and Procurement Committee or indeed back to this committee itself. Finally, Chair, just recognising the importance for officers to enact decisions made by committee as the settled will of the council, I just wanted to reassure members that greater rigour will be applied by officers, particularly lead officers supported by democratic services, to ensure that our revised and strengthened corporate governance arrangements are implemented in full following the independent review of the operation of our committee system. Hopefully, Chair, I trust that addresses the points that were raised with me directly and with your and the Vice Chair's consent. I trust that also meets with the agreement of members of the committee this morning, and therefore propose we reopen those 3 items and instead show them as in progress. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you for the work that's gone into getting that agreement at this point. Steve, if you want to come in now, that's fine.
Yeah, I too want to thank the Chief Executive, Stephen Moore. We had an interesting conversation, myself, Councillor Goldsack, about the points that we've covered this morning. We feel that that's adequately responded not to our personal needs, but the needs and requests of this committee. We also said at that point in time it was appropriate to raise these with the Chair, because obviously these were actions that the Chair had herself put in that weren't really fully completed the way they were presented. And we're glad that we've all come to sing for the same hymn sheet on this, and we look to see what the end result will be. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further comments on those points on the action log? I don't see any, so that's great. We will make those alterations in the record. Are there any points that anybody wants to raise on any other elements of the action log? No. Thank you very much. Okay, so we will agree that the action log should be agreed with those changes, and move to item 3 on the agenda, which is petitions and public questions. We've received no petitions or public questions, so we move to item 4 on the agenda, which is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report for the period ending the 31st of August, and Stephen Howe will present it. Hello, Stephen, welcome.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning, everybody. This report presents the Council's consolidated management accounts as at the end of August, containing updates on the revenue position, capital position, and other financial performance metrics. Now, it's a bumper report, as you have noticed, but I'll spend a bit of time going through the revenue position in particular, introducing the capital position, and also drawing members' attention to the treasury position. On the revenue side, in summary, the Council's forecast variance in year at the end of August is a £6.4 million overspend, which is approximately 1.3% of the budget. When we last met in, I think it was the May report, the forecast overspend was £4.5 million. I'll go through in some detail the key parts of that forecast overspend position, just given the scale of it. So if I draw members' attention to the table at 2.1.1, which I think is page 40 of your report, particularly drawing members' attention to the forecast variance column. So line 1, first and foremost, is the Children Education and Families Directorate. That is a forecast overspend of £8 million, and links to the significant pressures on the children's placement budgets. Excuse me, and within that also there are staffing overspends forecast. Line 4 in the Place and Sustainability Directorate shows an overspend linked to the energy schemes, which members will have seen. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a tickle today. Members will have seen in the previous report. Line 8 on capital financing shows an underspend, and as does line 9 on the funding items linked to business rates. So members will also see lines 2, the DSG line, and line 7, public health variances. These are offset on line 10 as they are ring-fenced positions. So I'll also draw members' attention to the unmitigated forecast variance column, which is a new column in this report reflecting a development showing our shift to gross and net reporting on our budgets and on our forecasts, particularly line 3 on adults and line 4 on place show unmitigated variances that are higher than their forecast variances, and the tables at line 2.1.2 show the nature of those mitigations and where they are. And so this deals with some of the members' requests around reserves usage, and shows where there are planned reserves built into the forecast to mitigate pressures, particularly in this case on the waste service in place and sustainability. It also shows some of the mitigations being around grant funding. Given the seriousness of the overall forecast overspend position, departments are looking for further mitigations, including reviewing all non-essential spend and critically reviewing recruitment activity. And so the recommendations, I think B and C, set out our request that this committee notes that further mitigation activity, and also charges the service committees with trying to scrutinise variances in more detail. Running then briefly through the capital position, there is no forecast overspend at this stage or forecast underspend. Forecasts are currently in line with the capital slippage that is allowed for in budgets. Members recall there's a net position. Thank you. Within that, very kind. But at this stage, that forecast slippage is forecast to be met and no more. I'll draw then members' attention to the table at 4.5.2. This is linked to recommendation A in the report. So there are 4 requested changes to capital budgets that have been that are being proposed here. 2 of them linked to further prudential borrowing. So the first one around county farms is a smallish increase in the potential borrowing required there. But then the second one on Swaffham Priory Community Heat Network, and this follows a report that went to Environment and Green Investment Committee recently, where this recommendation was endorsed around increasing the budget for that scheme to maximise the speed with which we can do connections for the heat network. So this does eat into the return on investment for this scheme, but overall, over the course of the scheme, does still result in a positive ROI. And if there are further questions on this one, then I've got a colleague from the relevant team who will be able to answer those. But as I say, the relevant service committee did scrutinise these. Then 2 environment requests, one around safety valve and school schemes, just moving between those schemes in line with the flexibility we do have under the safety valve. And then around, finally, the Waterbeach waste treatment plant, where environment is requested to push some budget into next year, reflecting that realistically we don't expect there to be any expenditure at the level budgeted for this year following developments there, which have also been reported through the relevant committee. Then finally, Chair, I will just make sure members' attention is drawn to Appendix 6, which is the Treasury Management section of this report. It's a requirement of the Treasury Management Strategy that these, particularly the potential indicators on page 74, are brought to members' attention quarterly. And just to say on this basis that the Council's cash position remains relatively healthy, and the Treasury Management indicators are all showing as positive in that we are either meeting them or sort of under the limits, if you like. So I'll leave the introduction there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, and thank you for battling through the cough. Does anybody, Steve, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, it's quite a long report. There's quite a lot in it. So if I can just drill down on recommendation A at the moment, discover what's going on there, and some questions about that, and then we can return to the rest of the report later on. So A is recommendations to change the capital charge, most of which are contained on the table 4.5.2 on 49. And the 2 ones that I need to drill down into further are the County Farms investment, which is the first one, 0.33 million, and the second one is the Swaffham Priory Community Heat Scheme. So on the first one, it's 0.33 million, and it says it's because the works required are replacements due to damage caused by solar panels, not damage to solar panels, which I could understand. So I'd like to understand what happened. Did these fly off into a farm building or something like that? And then I'd really like to know, if they did, why we aren't pursuing whoever installed them, because I can't imagine how else a solar panel could damage something. The second one of which is the Swaffham Priory Community Heat Scheme. It's clear from the bookwork that the request for this money is out of sync with the narrative in there. We're being asked for money to connect things by October for the heating season, and then pause for the winter and reconnect next year. This is clearly a target that's been missed. And if we had asked last month, if we had a meeting last night, instead of these quarterly ones, or the month before, this could have been dealt with. So I'm not happy at thinking about why I should approve prudential borrowing simply to stall this project or get a few houses connected for the winter, based on the narrative that's actually ensconced in the support. So if I could have some comments on those two.
I can see that Cheryl has moved to the table, so I'm guessing that you might have more up-to-date information on this, Cheryl.
Shall we start on the second one, or would you like to start on the first one? Because, okay, so if we start on Sophan Prior. So where
Cheryl, could you move your microphone slightly closer to you? Because I think it would make it a bit easier. Thank you.
Okay, so we've finished the construction of the energy centre and the district heat network going through the village, and that was under one contract. Then the second part is around how you connect homes onto that district heat network. So we have connected 60 homes ahead of this winter season to the network with the existing funding that we have. We're now taking a pause so that during the winter we can check how the heating system is working with that load on the network. We're then planning what the next stage or next phase of connections to that heat network look like, which will be starting in April. It's much better to connect during the summer and sort of shoulder months than in the deep winter season, because if your heating connection with your home to the network doesn't work, it creates a problem for the householder. But not only that, it's the fact that when we've been connecting these first 60 homes, the costings that have come through have been higher than was anticipated. So that's material costs and labour costs have added to a higher cost of connection than anticipated. So what we're trying to do during the winter is go through a re-procurement with Bouygues to see how we can manage costs for those connections better into the next programme and what efficiencies we can bring into that. So as an example, when you undertake a retrofit, which is what this is, when you start connecting homes, it's voluntary. Our homes come forward to sign up to the scheme. So in that first phase, you have homes spread out throughout the whole village looking to connect, and the efficiencies in that process, what we, in terms of this development process, has been that we think we can improve costs. So that's why we're taking a pause. So for the next phase, we can gather the homes together, work out a schedule to say this is how and when you'll connect, and we'll streamline in terms of street work permits, in terms of mobilisation of demobilisation and mobilisation of crews, looking at getting better costings now through from the subcontractors. So there isn't a large pool of subcontractors. That's what we discovered in this first phase, waiting to do that work. They are very busy in the construction industry, and so it's been challenging to get competitive prices. So there's a whole range of reasons why we're looking to ask for additional money for upfront cost for connections, because the costs are higher. We want to improve the efficiency. And then the other thing that we're looking to do is to have the conversations with government around what are the additional grants that we could look to secure for, let's say, the social housing providers, so that we can try and reduce the costs more strategically for those home connections. Anything else?
Thank you, Cheryl. I think that was really helpful. Just for the benefit of anybody who hasn't been engaged with this project over the last 6 years or however long it is that it's been going, if you could just give a very short outline about when those original costs would have been put forward, and the sort of narrative of the project so far, because I think it's important context for this project for anybody who just happens to be dropping in to watch this meeting.
That's a really good point, actually, and my apologies, I should have done that right to start with. So Sophan Prior Community Heat Project is a community-led project. We were approached by the Sophan Prior Community Land Trust to ask for a solution to get the village, which is currently off gas and on oil, to see how we could take the village off of oil. and onto a new heating solution. They'd already undertaken work in the village to identify who and how people would want to participate in that process. So they approached us to collaborate with them and to see if we could secure additional grants to support them on this endeavour. The village overall in those early stages were positive. They wanted to have change. So the project as it developed was a collaboration with government. So government funded along with us, the development phase. And that development phase went through a whole number of steps. So as an example, we had to go through techno-economic modelling. We had to work out what the options were for the different schemes, and the preferred scheme that came forward was a ground source, air source heat pump in an energy centre with a district heat network. Now, the reason government was interested in that conversation was because a lot of the work around retrofitting homes was focused on large urban areas. So this is where, you know, high density London, Bristol, Manchester. But what wasn't clear was how we were going to deal with the rural communities. And the concern was, will rural communities, and especially off-gas communities, of which we've got more than 25,000 homes, were they going to be left behind in this narrative and in the process of sorting out commercial models? So the discussion with government was around sorting out and looking at a commercial model that could support decarbonising a whole village. And at the same time, you're looking at how do you increase the pace and scale of getting retrofitted homes. And so just to sort of add to that issue of pace and scale, if you leave to the voluntary market, the able to pay market, you may get homes coming forward gradually over time. If you can sort a solution which is available, you get quicker connections. So just even in Swaffham Prior, you've got 60 homes that have gone through and connected in the last 6 months to decarbonise their heating and hot water. And we're fully expecting to have a further 100 connected next year. So that's 160 homes in one village out of 300 homes. Our plan is it's a 5-year plan of connections. So over 5 years, we hope to get to 90%. Now, what is different between a retrofit and, let's say, you've got a new development where you put in a heating scheme in that new development, automatically the householders have to have the heating system that you supply. Where we are is it's a choice issue on a retrofit of whether you participate or you don't. And what's become very clear, and this is also part of the learning process on here, is that lots of people want to see how this technology works. So we have the people who are the early movers who are connected, and we have a whole range of people saying, let's just see how we get through the winter in terms of those connections. But we have got people inquiring and wanting to be part of the scheme and to connect. The one other thing that I think was really important here was just the carbon emission reductions, and also the future fuel poverty issues that we're wanting to look at, and also trying to overcome that barrier of able to pay. So this scheme, and this is one of the reasons why we're asking for the money up front and that this money gets paid back over the life of the project, is that money is not a barrier to decarbonising here. So we want to put the costs up front to get these homes connected, and then the cost of that is paid out over time. When you put a cost barrier in there, it takes a lot longer for people to make the choices to connect. So that's our experience. So the benefit at the moment is the carbon emission savings, the ability to offer something to the whole of the village of all house types and sizes, and to get the pace and scale moving on retrofit. Okay, does that help?
Yes, very
Sorry,
helpful.
I could go on forever.
Yes, probably slightly longer than I had anticipated.
Sorry.
But that's great. No, it's totally fine. I think the really important point is that this is a trailblazer project, and it's bound to have the whole project is about learning, and the next bit of learning is about how we can make it most efficient to connect people into the system. Thank you very much for that. Michael.
conscious there was two parts to that, so just want to pick up the first part. And I'm sure a version I read said solar panel installations, and I don't see the installations word there. This was damage caused to the highway as a result of the heavy vehicles being taken across the road. So that's the repair work that's being carried out, but it's still within the overall return on investment for the scheme.
Thank you, Michael. Really helpful. I'll come back to you, Steve, but Mark, I've got you as well. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. So on the second point first, this is works to the highways, which is going to be cost shunted onto a solar farm scheme because there is a positive outcome. And it may have been caused by the solar farm scheme, but it seems to me that what we're doing is it's really a varmint between the solar energy scheme and the highways maintenance budget for good or bad reasons. That's what it is. Where this first one is actually to repair highways. So it's come across slightly unusually in this document. I won't quibble too much about that because if the highways need doing, they need doing. And where you want the way you want to describe that money is up to you. On the second one, the recommendations in front of us, based on the answers we've got, are very, very difficult to swallow. And I'll explain why. So as you know, and the six-year history, this is a trailblazer pilot scheme started under the last administration and backed by the joint administration that's now. And we have said that this is a good idea. It'd be lovely to get a village off of fossil fuels, and how can we go about it? But if you remember at the last meeting, we noticed that I think I stand to be corrected, but I think all of the energy schemes that were carried on by the joint administration are over time, over budget and cost and losing revenue because not delivered on time. And it just seems to be that every time we go to a meeting, we're asked for more money. That led to the proposal for amendment at the last meeting for a deep dive into the energy schemes. That amendment was changed into an action from the chair. And as we've heard at the start of the meeting today, that action was not delivered. Instead, we have to restart again because basically we were saying what's happening with all of the energy schemes, that they are over time and over budget. Was it the predictions that were wrong at the start? That could have happened under the previous administration. I don't know. Was it the fact that we suddenly had inflation? Possibly. Is it all down to inflation? We don't know. We do know we have a problem. And yet, because we've missed that piece of work, we're 3 months further on, we're being asked for another 3.2 million. Specifically on the 3.2 million pounds, of which I tried to drill down and got an answer, 1.095 million was required this year, which is why it's in front of us. That 1.095 million was to connect homes to the grid. We heard that 60 are already connected, which this is not needed for this year, and the rest will be paused till next year. So that is not needed for this year. So 1.095 million is not needed for this year, according to the answers we've just received. Out of that 3.2, the difference is needed for a different year, because that's what the recommendation says to us. Only part of that is needed for this year. So therefore, that should be in the actual budget proposals going forward for next year, so that we can measure against other requests for funding, such as the highways and the safety on the highways, particularly with peat soil roads, where people may well, instead of the choice between being hot or cold, may be seriously injured or killed. So it changes the narrative when we decide on that to an overall picture, to a specific picture. Based on that, I cannot see why we're being asked to support this today, and ask the chair that perhaps Michael Hudson, the head of finance, to look at those recommendations and comment onto whether they should actually be in front of us today, or based on the responses, have I got something wrong? And there is still a justification for them today. Thank you.
Michael or Cheryl, do either of you want to respond to that? Cheryl.
I can add a first point to it. So there are obviously 60 connected right now, and there's still more that we're trying to connect during this next month. The the cash limit that we have on the moment isn't sufficient to cover the ones before the winter process, before the winter stop and pause, and we're planning for the next year. So there is a need for some of that budget immediately. The balance, as in the full 3.2 million, we will be looking to spend during, so from March, April onwards into over the summer and shoulder months to get the next set onto the scheme. But obviously we're going through the procurement process and the conditions of getting the subcontractors lined up over the winter and working through those efficiencies. So you need to have some certainty around what your budget position is going to look like. And what your envelope of costs could sit within. So that's the starting point. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything on there, Michael.
Through you, Chair. The only thing I'd add is that the last report, I'm trying to remember if that was, July, brought this as an overspend position. So this is also addressing the cost spends that have already been incurred in year. So I'm satisfied that the 1.095 is in year spend. Some of it has already actually been incurred and is being reported previously as an overspend.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on the point that Steve made, which was that just checking that I've understood this correctly. My understanding is that this money is going into investing in a project where the return will come back to the council. That's a very different type of spend from any kind of spend that could be spent on soil damage roads where there would be no return to the council. Can I just check that I've got that correct?
Certainly the heat scheme has a return on investment calculation to repay borrowing and all the funds. So that would be that. Any spend in relation to a highways is purely in relation to repair and maintain. We don't apply a return on investment calculation.
Thank you for that clarification. Mark.
Thank you. I'd like to discuss the road issues of the county farms thing, but I will also reference the other scheme. My concern on this, and it's my ward, so I know it well, and I know exactly what's happened. This is a single track, concrete based road slab build. Okay. And the amount of HGV traffic down there for this has disturbed the road, and it's, I wouldn't say beyond repair, but it's obviously reached an expensive repair. My issues is that when you do a project of any size, be it a 2-minute exercise or a thing, there's only time, there's only cost, and there's only quality is the three elements. Okay. We have employed at great expense Weegs to oversee this for us. I cannot understand, or I'd like to understand, how we've got no mitigation on the impact of that project on the local area. So, for instance, why are we not now in any commercial environment through procurement dealing with Bouygues on holding them to account for fix the road that their transportation under their watch broke? That's my first point. So that leads me to question the overall program management of that enterprise. I mean, it's a good scheme. I see the scheme, but there's elements of it, and I see Cheryl nodding. I'm not saying anything I didn't say when I was chair of EG&I. Spokes on EGI. I was never chair of EG&I, so apologies. But the other thing is, when you look at the Swaffham Prior scheme, it's a similar thing using the same contractor to, and I'm not anti-Bouygues here. I don't want that to be the issue, but I'm also concerned here about our procurement methods. When I know, because I know the farmers, they've held us to ransom, knowing full well that they've got a ransomable strip of land into which a cable's got to go to link this village up to the electrical source down in Burwell. And it's gone from the solar farm in Soham all the way through. And it's cost us well over the budget for what we should do. Now, my question here, using those two key examples, is, are we getting the procurement right when we're going to our project management, program management partners in this? Okay. And B, if the Swaffham Prior Community Heat Scheme is a learning project, can we have a full and frank open learnings as to how we avoid this procurement debacle again in the future? And please note, I'm not saying when that procurement was. It could have been on the previous administration's watch. What I'm saying is we should be learning these lessons and actioning on them, because I'm worried about these extra expenses coming in to bail out something that really should have been mitigated.
So my understanding is that it was the procurement did occur under the previous administration's watch. I think that there are certainly lessons to be learned over the way in which the procurement for these schemes was done, and particularly for the way in which the income from them was budgeted and put into the budget initially. But I'll come back to Cheryl on for more detail on that.
So I think let's just focus on the road and the damage to the road. So this happened when the Triangle Farm was constructed. Originally, the damage had happened. It was recognised ahead of the North Angle Solar Farm that there would be heavy trucks going across that path or along that road. Money was put in the budget to fix it sufficiently to allow those trucks to go across the road. And to go to the scheme. What wasn't in there was enough to be able to cover the full reinstatement of the road to the level that we'd expect it to be now. So that was the first point, is that there was some remedials money in the contract to get lorries across a road which was already damaged. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, which is the issue, I'm not going to go into details around the private wire, but the issue that I'd like to highlight is in the procurement, this was done through REFIT. So it's a framework procurement. It was undertaken through mini competitions. We had tenders submitted for those, and we've got all the audit trail around the correctness of those procurements and how they have followed the framework that was set. And that was, the framework was originally set. There was two frameworks we followed, REFIT 2 and REFIT 3. And REFIT 3 was undertaken by the LGA with local partnerships. It was a shared framework. And so all the contracting and all the due diligence had been done through that process on the framework contractors. And when we ran our mini competition, we then went through the whole process of due diligence and securing the contractual terms. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cheryl. That does explain a lot of the issue. The second part of this I would like to say is that due to the length of this project, that self-same traffic has been going by very close to houses through roads really not suitable for that, and over a very small stone bridge, which is only point of access, where there's also been reported damage. I have to agree with my colleague Steve here on the fact that I think whilst the cause is possibly this project, this is a highway project. You've said yourself, this was a recognised highways issue before South Angle Farm solar scheme even started, because it came from Triangle scheme, and it should have been dealt with under the highways budget. And that's where this money should be. It shouldn't be part of the fund that's coming from this if we've not got a mitigation to cover this off with our project managers.
Thank you, Chair. And it's a shame, but we're still on recommendation A of the first series paper we're considering today. But I think the depth of what we've had to ask today compared to what we've seen in the paperwork is the explanation behind this all. So what we've heard is that the connections will pause now for the winter. So the money isn't needed. When I said that means the money isn't needed, that changed into actually it's not paused now. We've got more lined up that will be connected. We also learned that actually some of this money is to cover an overspend that's already happened. Furthermore, there is money requested for next year's budget to give us certainty for how we're moving ahead that's been taken out of the planning round. And we're hearing another set of money is actually cost shunting from the highways budget from a solar panel, which reduces the return on investment there. I'm deeply unhappy that the information we've been presented with to try and make decisions on is, in my opinion, quite a long way away from what we've discovered this morning. Therefore, I'd like a recommendation to be taken, to be taken separately when we go to the recommendations. I, for one, feel that I do not want to get in the way of this project because we have so much sunk costs. And I do understand the words. In this case, we can strip out cost being a barrier to residents picking up on it. But I don't want to be seen to be endorsing this level of information, this type of information coming across in this way, where we have to eke it out bit by bit. So I'll be abstaining on A, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make clear, I do not accept that this is a cost shunting thing. I think that's been said. I don't think it's been accepted by the officers and it's not accepted by me. I'm happy to take the recommendations separately. That's fine. Lorna.
Yes, while we are on recommendation A, and I make no comment as to why we are still on recommendation A, I just want to go back to the fact that this is a bold and a brave and an innovative project. It was right for the council to take it on, and it has been the subject of much learning, which I think will be valuable to us in future exercises of this sort, given the 25,000 homes that are still off the gas grid and the need to make radical change to how we heat our homes. It was the right decision to take, but it has been plagued by the things that are familiar to us in this committee now. Supply chain issues, that sudden spike in inflation after the Trust budget. And there are always going to be learnings with bold, brave, innovative projects, and we are learning them. There are things that happened in earlier stages of the project, which we are just now finding out and uncovering and learning how to cope with. But also, I would say that there is a monthly or so meeting of the Green Investment and Utilities Advisory Group, on which the group opposite has full representation, which meets regularly and goes through all of the projects, including this one, in eye-watering, mind-numbing detail. And I love it because that's one of the things I love, but it provides us regularly as members with huge amounts of information about the financial progress, the technical issues, the risks in all sorts of ways. And we're not just coming along and going, oh, by the way, we need another £3 million. We are combing through this meticulously on a cross-party basis to make sure that we're on top of this and delivering this as best we can. And it was an absolute joy and a pleasure to go along recently to Swaffham Prior Village Hall to celebrate the first anniversary of the switch on of the first properties in this scheme. I think that's marvellous. The community, some of whom were sceptical at first, are really beginning to come along with this, and we are seeing minds changed. People who initially were saying, I don't think this is for me, wanting to join in and be part of it. And that's great. And I'm really pleased that there will be more connections before Christmas, and that if this recommendation is passed, as I believe it should be, there will be more recommendations afterwards. And just trying to throw things into under the hooves of this project at this stage, I think would be absolutely appalling. And I think it's something we shouldn't even countenance.
Thank you. Chris and then Steve. Steve and then Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're in danger of missing the point here. Nobody on this side is saying we're doing the wrong thing. It's the way it's being presented in a paper that's open to the public. So the fact that this has been discussed elsewhere and that members should be aware of it is not the point. It's how this is presented in a public-facing paper that people would feel they should scrutinise and understand the situation. So it's a matter of presentation and being honest and open with the facts, rather than saying that we're doing the wrong thing. I just think we should be clear about that. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure that there has also been discussion at the ENGI committee. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy, and good morning. I'm afraid I wish to talk about something other than Swaffham Prior. So if anyone else wishes to continue the discussions about Swaffham Prior, I'd rather let them get in first. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. I have two questions. It's on Appendix A and paragraph 5.3. And the first is a mathematical one, which I'm afraid officers may need to tell me where I'm going wrong. And the second is a policy one, which I'd like to put to you, Lucy. So the first on, it's page 19 of 44 in Appendix A. It's to do with the percentage of income collected within 90 days on adult social care. Now, we know, and it's mentioned in the report, that this is a national problem. It's not a local problem, and I'm not seeking to make any point about Cambridgeshire in particular here. But the numbers, I can't make sense of the numbers in items 1 and 2. In item 2, we're told that the level of debt outstanding of 91 days or more for adult social care had a target of 9.96 million, but the actual is 15, or was at the end of August, 15.46 million. That is some 50% higher, sorry, 55% higher than the target. Now, that's consistent with the fact that there is a problem right across the country. What I don't understand is item 1, where we're told that the percentage of income collected within 90 days for adult social care, which has a target of 85%, that target has been met. Now, from a mathematical point of view, unless we're saying that the amount of income collectible has increased by 55%, which I would find very strange indeed, I just can't reconcile the increase in 55% in the level of debt outstanding and the supposed fact that we've met our target of the amount of income collected within 90 days. Unless we're talking about two different things when we're talking about adult social care debt, I just do not understand how those two figures correlate. And I'd very much appreciate just an explanation for that.
I'm hoping Stephen can give us that. And I've also got Richard to come in. Stephen.
It might be best if we do right round just to explain that to members to make sure we get the correct information. The amount of income that we do collect has gone up year on year. It goes up by inflation. It goes up as other contributions increase. But we'll just triple check the maths on that and right round to members just to confirm either way.
Thank you. I'm happy.
I appreciate that. And if that could be sent to my Fenland address, because quite a few of these answers are going to my Cambridge address and I'm not picking them up for some time. So if it can go to my Fenland address, which is the one which is recorded,
that would
be really helpful. Thank you.
I've got Richard wanting to come in. Did you want to come in on this point, Richard? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful for that question and for further information being distributed to us. I just wanted to add to the point. I think adult social care debt is a big issue. And I think we've seen that financially, and I understand that. But I think we also need to be asking questions about what's behind that. And what I saw, and Councillor Bowden saw in the user satisfaction survey this year, was a high level of dissatisfaction with the way that we were managing that debt. And I think, I think we should have open discussions at committees like this. I think our current systems are still not fit for purpose in terms of sensitivity to service users. Sometimes families who have lost bereaved and are bereaved having lost their parents, and that we should recognise, we're going to be talking later about the cost of living crisis and how that's impacting people, that we have increasing numbers of our service users who feel that the charges that we're levying are unaffordable and are facing very, very difficult decisions on whether to accept care packages at levels of course that they feel are not affordable to them. And I don't think it's easy, because there's big money involved in this, and we're trying our utmost to manage the services as best as possible to keep it all going under a lot of financial pressure. But it's why the Adults and Health Committee has agreed to undertake a charges review, so that we can review whether our current charging structure is best in terms of people suffering from poverty, and if there are better ways, including better claiming of welfare benefits in order for them to be able to do so. So I think there's some perfectly proper questions we've heard there about making sure that the figures add up and the maths is right, and maybe something's been spotted there that there's a mistake and we should get to the bottom of. But I do think that as we're raising this issue, we should address the human cost to all of this, and to send out a signal we're aware of that and that we are working on it.
Thank you. Very good points. Michael.
Chair, again, and it's probably one of those, because I read the tables and the tables behind it. You kind of, it's taken me a while just to try and get to the bottom in terms of understanding the question. So the actual second line has debt that goes over several years. So actually, in terms of the amount collected, then we have a certain element that's paid on direct debit, but we have other debt such as court of protection, which we're awaiting, but we also have debt greater than 1 year that rolls and rolls and rolls, and so this figure has been increasing.
Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I was perfectly happy to leave the answer that was given before, and also to thank Richard for his very thoughtful contribution. But Michael's comment forces me to ask a question. I can understand perfectly what Michael says, but then surely that should have been within the target. So if we had a target, the target should have taken into account previous year's debt as well. So something even more doesn't add up if the answer is previous year's debt.
Yeah, and the simple answer here is we've not moved the target because we're aiming to continue to address this and push this back down. So part of this is looking at the reasoning. So we have a large element of this is down to the court of protection, which is down to a failure of the backlog in the court systems. And so actually, addressing and moving the target would potentially take the focus off what is a very important issue, which is what Councillor Harriott was picking up in terms of the need to address this.
Thank you, Lucy. I'll look forward to those numbers with great interest now. My second question, which was more directed to you, with all due respect, because there's a policy issue here, which we've talked about before, is the percentage of undisputed commercial supply invoices not paid within terms. Now, we've addressed this before, and I think we were both surprised to discover the quantity of commercial supply invoices which were meant to be paid instantaneously, which of course is impossible. And I think that we both recognized that the figures that we were being given were rather skewed by the fact that payment terms of immediate payment terms were being asked for. And quite correctly, you agreed that we ought to change that so that more realistic payment terms are included in contracts in future. And that is mentioned within this report, and it's one of the reasons why we're seeing an improved figure already. I have a little concern because it looks as though from the report there is a choice between two things. We either have immediate terms, which sometimes may be unavoidable, as is mentioned in the report, or we move it towards 30-day terms. Now, for small local suppliers, going from immediate terms to 30-day terms is quite a difference. And I wonder, and this is a policy matter, could we also look at potentially having 7-day payment terms in certain circumstances for smaller suppliers?
I think Michael would like to come in on this as well.
Thank you, Chair. And what I can confirm is that that's a cumulative for the year, 91.8%. We are now actually above the 95% in terms of a month-on-month position for the last 2 months. So that position will continue to improve. We do offer a range of terms in terms of, from the immediate to 7 days to 30 days. And the procurement team are presently reviewing this alongside a number of other policy proposals that they're looking at. So this certainly does pick that up, and certainly we would not look to penalise SMEs through that policy.
That is excellent news. Thank you, Lucy. I just wonder if a report on that will be coming to assets and procurement so that we can see more detail.
Yes, it is planned. I can't remember if it is January or the March one, but yes, that is planned.
It looks to me as if your question has been answered, Chris. So that's very helpful. Not by me, I'm afraid. So there's a lot in this report. Fine, Steve, come
on. Thank you, Chair. As I said, I'd like to come back on a couple of things that are outside of the recommendation A. The first one is a question, and that is on page 58. It is the mitigations against forecast outturn variance for older people, and £2.5 million is from external grant. I want to know if that's external grant that's been received this year. Was that external grant carried in reserves? On the commentary earlier on about adult social care debt, I'd like to point out a simple fact that overdue adult social care debt has gone up by over 50% since this administration has taken over. meaning there's £6 million plus that is not available for this council to spend at the moment because of the increase in adult social care debt. We often get reasons provided by those that perhaps on the adults committee or other committees, and they say, well, things are changing, we have problems. For example, it's a national problem. I've said in the past, and this was to do with staffing, when people quote these kind of things, I'd like some benchmarking to provide some information. So we're told that by one member today that the reason the adult social care debt has gone up is because it's a national problem. I'd like to know that even in the last 2 years, it has gone up by over 50% nationally as a benchmark against the county, Cambridgeshire County Council. If it has, then fair enough, and I accept that as an explanation. If it hasn't, then I think that we need to investigate what's going wrong here as opposed to what's happening elsewhere. So it'd be a useful benchmarking exercise. I hope you can agree to that, Chair. The third one I just want to touch on really is the commentary on the County Farms Appendix 2, which is page 86, and basically it's caused a delay, which has caused us costing money on the County Farms budget. And it says once the Section 106 agreement has been completed, we will be able to undertake a large marketing program to increase the profile of the unit and attract more sales. This is the biodiversity area that we created, which has got great prospect for income in the future. In officer speak, the delay in the signing of the Section 106 agreement is because this is a new project that South Cambs District Council have not dealt with before, and they are being very thorough with the agreement. I'm disappointed because we all know what that means, and we've seen many reports about what's happening at South Cambs with their 4-day week with their planning department. We've just seen new housing approved outside of that because they didn't undertake planning in time. This is costing us money, and there was an intent from this administration when they came in to do more working with partners, but all I ever see in the paperwork in front of us is largely that partners are our relationships are being soured from one direction or another. I don't know how much this has cost us, but it's clear it's a sizable amount. Probably 328,000 is the minimum. But thank you very much. But answers to the first one, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to pick up the first one? And I will comment on the second bit. But...
So on the first one, in terms of the grants that are used in mitigation on the adult social care position, it's a blend of grants that are received in year and then also some Contained Outbreak Management Fund grant that was carried forward from a previous year. Ring fence grants sort of kind of automatically carry forward and then go back into revenue. So, but used in line with the grant conditions, I should say.
On the second point, I'm not aware that there's any evidence whatsoever that any of the delay due to on the income from the biodiversity project has anything to do with the 4-day week at South Cambs, and I just want to put that on the record. Do we have any other questions? Before we move on from this, I think there's an absolutely enormous topic that nobody has touched on, and I'm astonished that it hasn't been mentioned by anybody, which is that a huge part of the pressure on this council is coming from children's social care, is coming from very, very high levels of placements in children's social care, and that is a national picture, and it's something that is an absolutely enormous risk for this council. And I think it's something that we shouldn't move on from this paper without making a significant note around. It's also something that will come up later on, I hope, in this meeting when we discuss the quality of life survey. I think Stephen wanted to say something about it. I do slightly wonder whether we ought to have an action from this meeting to express our concern about the scale of this risk, not just to this council, but to other councils. And we might come back to that in a moment. But Steve, sorry, there are definitely too many Steves and Stevens in this room. Stephen Moyer.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm glad members' attention has been drawn to the pressures on children's social care, particularly. Members will be aware that this is not exclusively around high cost placements, but clearly the commentary in the report reflects what can best be described as a national market failure for children's social care, particularly those young people in crisis. The leader is right to point out that this is a national problem. We know that from clear work with other members of the County Councils Network and the Local Government Association, both of whom continue to lobby government hard in this area, because quite frankly, Chair, the recommendations of the independent McAllister review into children's social care recommended to government have not been taken forward, and that is really quite concerning in terms of the impact on children, and more importantly, in terms of the impact on the children and young people here in Cambridgeshire. So in terms of what do I mean by market failure? Well, first of all, we have the situation, slightly perverse if you ask me, that crisis placements for children and young people that need residential secure support for complex needs, particularly those that may have behavioural difficulties, mental health issues, or indeed may be violent or aggressive as a result of their conditions. Those placements continue to cost this council an exorbitant amount of money because the national market is broken. I will give you an example of one young person that we have been accommodating in this council, costing us £85,000 a week because of the nature of their support and needs that was required, with a ratio of 7 to 1 in terms of staffing required to meet their particular needs. I'm pleased to say our children's social care team have been able to review that placement, have been able to recently move the young person into a further regulated placement that now costs around £30,000 a week. However, I'm using that particular example just to exemplify to members how difficult this situation is. Our Executive Director for Children, Education and Families actually shared with me yesterday that we have 6 young people, because of the high acuity needs that they have, costing this council currently £200,000 a week because of the nature of their placement needs. That is replicated across all upper tier local authorities in England. This is a substantial problem, and we see that coming through in our financial reporting this year, and indeed other county councils within our own network are in exactly the same place. We are also seeing further pressures on things like SEND provision and home to school transport. Again, not unique to Cambridgeshire, but this system is one that, from a financial perspective and a delivery perspective, is without doubt, in my view, in crisis nationally, and something needs to be done to better support the young people that we have a statutory duty to serve. We've had a 40% increase in contacts to our integrated front door for children's services within the last year alone, October to October, 12,000 contacts over the last 6 months. That is evidenced by the impact on children and young people's mental health, particularly emerging from the pandemic, much of which we also see reflected in the Quality of Life survey later today. The government has had opportunities to address some of this. The government still does with the Chancellor's autumn statement and the local government financial settlement. So as Chief Executive, I would probably make 2 key points for the members here today. Our officers are doing everything they can to manage crisis placements. They are reviewing on a weekly basis all of our high cost placements with a view to trying to ensure that we bring those costs down whilst meeting the need of the young people. We have had further constraints applied by government rather than improvements. So we are now no longer able to use unregulated placements, not that we should be, nor should any Children's Services Authority be doing that. But because of the market failure and the fundamental lack of placements available nationally, all authorities in upper tier areas have been having to use a very small number of unregulated placements from time to time to cope with the demands. That route has now been closed off by government. We've been told quite clearly we can no longer use those placements. And that has just, in my view, strengthened the monopoly, or dare I say the stranglehold, that providers in the children's social care residential market have, which has led to cost increases rather than cost management by government nationally. And then the second and perhaps final point I just wanted to make around children's social care, we would have hoped to see some improvements, not just from the broader points of the McAllister review, but actually from some of the specific opportunities around workforce that government has been able to take, such as applying a cap to agency social worker fees, or indeed capping the use of project teams by upper tier authorities like us to address some of the shortfall in children's social work capacity. Sadly, the government's published response to that consultation on the 25th of October has recognised that they will take none of those steps, and they've watered down the original proposals from the McAllister review quite substantially. So the agency cap that we would have hoped to help manage costs in this place for us as a provider is not going to be taken forward in the way we might have expected. So I guess, Chair, my sort of concluding remark is This is a system in crisis. Cambridgeshire is seeing that impact on its own budget. We will do everything we can to protect the young people in our care. That's our fundamental and overriding responsibility. But I think we need to see national response in terms of funding and ensuring the system doesn't continue to be in crisis, whether here or elsewhere in England. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. I think it is by some distance the biggest issue within this paper. It's a really serious issue for this council and for our budget this year and looking further forward. It's also an enormous risk, because when we're talking about the scale of costs for quite small numbers of children, you only need a small number of new children coming into the system to send those numbers even worse than they are now. I think my suggestion to this meeting is that it would be worth us adding our voices to those from the Local Government Association and the County Councils network to express concern to central government about their failure to act in this way, in this space. They did have a report, the McAllister report, which was commissioned by government, which, while I would have liked it to come to more conclusions and cover a wider remit than it did come up with some very sensible suggestions. It is disappointing that those are not being responded to in a timely way and that some of them are being watered down. So I don't know whether there is support for that from this meeting. I wouldn't want to do that unless there was support from across the whole chamber, but I'll come to Stephen Moyer and then to Steve Camp.
Chair, apologies, just some contemporary news that probably exemplifies the point I was making. The Local Government Association released a report on the 29th of October confirming that the biggest independent children's care providers made over £300 million in profit last year. That probably just reaffirms exactly what I've been saying to committee this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
Yes, thank you, Chair. To a certain extent, the issues in the children's care market are well known, well established, and a lot of people have looked at it. We've seen the impact on the council and the way it's being handled. However, the way to handle letters to the government on subjects like this, I don't believe, is to ambush the politically aligned parties such as the Conservatives on this side and simply throw this in at the end of the meeting and say, will you all support a letter castigating the government? I don't think that's an appropriate use of this committee. If you care to write the letter, I'll look at the letter and then I'll see what I think then. So that's my response to that. What I would say, and I've said this at full council many, many times, is what would be more useful, instead of writing to letters to other people telling them how they should go about their business, would be to see what we can do. Now, we've heard that the officers are already working incredibly hard to mitigate the impacts locally. I do think that this should be the subject of a deep dive through the Children's Committee, for example, to see where we can add value. I'm not one for criticising officers. I'm not one for receiving reports and simply rubber stamping them. We're here to add value, such as the Children's Committee can add value as well. And so officers have a way of looking at things, and we have a way of representing the people and their views, and we may see things differently, and we can add value. So I think the strongest action you can take away today, Chair, is to ask the Children's Committee if they would do a deep dive on this and see what value they can add to the actions the officers are already undertaking. On a separate note, I did ask for an action on, can we have benchmarking on the adult social care debt to see if that's an explanation for the 50% increase since 2021? There was a lot of nodding, but I didn't get in your response, Chair, whether you was agreeable to that or not. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Richard.
I want to respond on the children's social care point, not the second point. First of all, I think it's entirely reasonable for you to raise this and for the Chief Executive to make the comments. I don't think it's an ambush, with greatest respect to the opposition. You know, we've all read these reports and want to highlight elements in them the opposition has, and it's proper they do so. And it's proper that you've raised this issue from the chair. I don't see this as anything other than a normal debate that we should be having at this committee. I share the concern. I don't think it was expressed by you as our chair as it's all the government's fault. You know, I think there is a sense of shared responsibility in there, and to that degree I agree with what Councillor Count said. But I think we should draw to attention that the Children's and Young People's Committee is addressing this. The idea they're not discussing this, and the executive director is not discussing this in huge detail. It may be that Councillor Count isn't part of that committee and hasn't seen that, but I certainly know that to be true. And I'm sure you're going to say this actually, but I don't think we want conflict over this in this committee. So if the outcome of this is that we delegate to the spokes the writing of such a letter, and that hopefully when the letter is written and subject to the contribution of the opposition can be agreed by consensus by the spokes, that then it's sent. But I think the fact that we add to what the County Councils network is doing and we have our voice heard is important. It's not a substitute for the things that we can and should do ourselves, but the absence of action is also a failure on our part. So I strongly support the idea of sending the letter, and I hope that method can be the way that it can be agreed on a cross-party basis.
Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for bringing this up. I think it was the right thing to do. I'm quite happy to hear the comments and from the Chief Executive. But I completely support two things here. One is I have no problem with writing a letter, but it's part of an action plan. It's not the action plan. Okay. And that's the issue here, right? I've seldom seen any of these letters do any good in the time that I've been sitting in this room, but I think as part of an action plan, it's the right thing to do. But secondly, the request for a deep dive is urgently needed. Let me tell you for why, right? I have two daughters that are primary school education teachers, and I have a wife who's a long-standing SEND special needs TA, okay? And I hear stories, I hear talk of the pressure in the classroom, of the knock-on effect of the whole SEND process that the Chief Executive so put. So it's great, well, sorry, it's not great. It's horrific to talk about hundreds of £1,000s a week spend on an individual, but the knock-on effect of that is felt at the classroom of everyday children. And that's why a letter is fine, but we need an absolute deep dive on this to understand the impact. So has a primary school got the resources to have the sufficient amount of trained TAs to deal with children that aren't being dealt with in an out-of-school environment? Because where they can stay in school, they should be. And look, we know the answers to that. We know, but let's have a look and see why. Lastly, on this matter, it's no surprise, and it's not political. I think Steve Count has mentioned something else which is absolutely key here, and that is, so, okay, we can write a letter, we can ask them to improve, we can sit back. What can we do? What can we absolutely do ourselves here to improve things from preschool environments, because it's impacting preschool, primary, right the way through secondary and further education schools and all aspects of life. So my point on this is, please write the letter. No problem with the letter, and thank you for bringing up the subject. But the answer is far, far greater than a typed letter.
And thank you for those comments, Mark. I completely agree. The answer is not a typed letter. I'm happy to take that away. We'll see if we can agree something or not. That's not a problem. In terms of what we can do, I do know that there is an enormous amount of work going on in the Children's Committee, looking at this issue, and indeed looking at the relationship between the extreme pressure that there is in the SEND world and high cost placements. They're not the same, but they are clearly connected, and there is a lot of work going on in the Children's Committee on that. I'll come to Michael in a minute. I think that the other thing that I think it's important that we do, and it would probably be good to report back how that's being done, is work with our partners in the East of England, because actually on this issue of very, very high cost placements, these are a small number of children with very extreme needs. Sometimes we might be able to meet those needs within Cambridgeshire, but actually making sure that we've got the right kind of provision across the East of England is probably another sensible way to look at that. I think what I'm going to suggest is that both on this and on the benchmarking, we ask for a briefing note to come out to members on both of those issues, so that members of this committee can feel that they're well informed on the actions that are being taken within this council and on the benchmarking on the adult social care issue. So if you're happy with that, that would be my suggestion about how we take both of those forward. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to reassure members, I mean, if reassurance is needed, that obviously CYP committee is taking all of these issues that have just been raised in a very short space of time very seriously. Both officers and members, we're thinking about, what can we do on these issues pretty much every day of every week, and, including on particular live cases and on the overall strategy. And indeed, as Councillor Goldsack referenced, the kind of ordinarily available provision that we make available to mainstream schools to ensure inclusion and proper support where that's appropriate. I think just to kind of to sort of synthesize what was I think being referenced by the chair and the chief executive, we're seeing a real clash between our sort of black and white statutory duty, which is absolutely right that that's there, but that's really coming into sort of difficulty with the kind of national market and policy failure that is being set by the top. And that's why you see these kind of astronomical costs shoot up, because these independent providers know that at the end of the day, the buck stops with the county council. We have to provide safe, secure, and enriching and thriving environments for our children, and we have no choice about that. And if we're pitched into a market with extreme shortages, then providers will charge the earth, and that's the situation that we find ourselves in. So I just wanted to provide that reassurance, I think, and I agree perhaps with the suggestions that the chair has made. I'd also be happy for perhaps a more detailed discussion at the next CYP spokes, I think would be appropriate, particularly as this can be quite kind of fast moving around these high cost placements, and that might be an appropriate forum for real kind of hot off the press updates. So perhaps we can take that as way as an action for CYP spokes as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further hands, which I'm hoping means that people are content with my suggested ways forward, and we will go to the recommendations. I will take recommendation A separately. So if we could vote first on recommendation A, I will try and bring it up and read it out, which might take me a minute. Maybe we don't need to read it out. So recommendation A is to approve borrowing and capital budget changes as set out in table 4.5.2 of Appendix A. So all of those who are in favour of recommendation A, if you could indicate now, please. And all of those against? And abstentions? Thank you. So that's carried, but not unanimously. And recommendations B and C, please, if I could see all of those in favour of recommendations B and C. And that is unanimous. So thank you very much to everybody for that discussion on agenda item 4, which was an important and thorough discussion. And thank you for your time, Stephen. We will now move on to agenda item 5, which is the business planning update. And is that being introduced by Michael or Stephen? Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Really bad double act. You'll have a bit for me and then a bit for Michael. So the paper before committee today is our progress update in respect of business planning for 2024 to 2029. The paper sets out 3 broad areas for members' consideration today. First of all, an update on the current business and budgetary planning position and our estimates of the situation over that period 24 to 29. Details of some of the principal risks, contingencies, and indeed implications facing the Council, outline of the process and next steps for the Council in agreeing a business plan and budget for future years. And I think perhaps importantly worth drawing attention, because of potential public interest as well as indeed member interest, the results of our very first quality of life survey, the summary headline of which is included as an appendix to this report. There is a wealth of additional information that will be published and available later today following committee's consideration of this report. In terms of the business planning elements, just a few points that I would want to draw to members' attention. First of all, the paper quite rightly reaffirms that the County Council's strategic framework and 7 ambitions, which was set by members in February 2022, is the basis upon which we now try to determine how the budget and indeed our overall resources are prioritised and allocated. That's an ongoing piece of work to move towards much more of an outcome-based budgeting and business planning framework, which is something that will be no doubt picked up further in our next consideration on this matter in December at this committee. I do just want to highlight some points before handing over to Michael on some of the key specifics around the financial elements. First of all, of course, we can all see from the estimates that are provided within this report, building on some of the monitoring that you received in the last report, we see the ongoing impact of inflation on our supplies and services expenditure. That also includes the impact that pay awards are having, both directly upon us as an employer, but indeed in our provider markets, thinking particularly for adult social care. I would just signal to members again today that there is currently no sign of a fair funding review by government, so Cambridgeshire should not anticipate anything in that space. My latest expectation is we would probably not anticipate any such review of funding for local government pre the general election, and of course post general election, irrespective of who forms the government, it will take some time because that needs to align to a comprehensive spending review. So I think, Chair, that means we need to really focus in on what we can do within our existing and known budgetary levels. That means that from a business planning perspective, we will need to look at a combination, in my view, of savings and service cuts. And I need to be clear that that's what it does mean. We will need to look at income, fees and charges, and that will include council tax consideration, which is a matter from members later in the budget process, of course. And finally, reserved to full council in February. And third, we will need to consider how best we use some of our reducing reserves to help smooth some of those impacts out. So I think those are things that will no doubt be picked up by Michael. Final two bits on the financial element before I turn briefly to the quality of life. Just to say that for members' awareness, I believe the date for the Chancellor's autumn statement has now been set for the 22nd of November from memory. Whilst the Chancellor's statement will obviously give the high-level overall position for the UK budget as a whole, we will have to wait some considerable time beyond that for the local government financial settlement. Regrettably, Chair, the latest intelligence we're receiving is that rather than even December for the local government financial settlement, which is never particularly easy, mindful of the run into the Christmas holidays and the work that that imposes on our finance team, like other authorities, we're now receiving indications that because of the Chancellor's statement and the knock-on consequence that may have to the local government financial settlement, it could even be in early January before we receive the settlement. And of course, there are other elements that we know are always even later than that, including the public health grant confirmation. So all of that adds to additional pressure upon members and indeed officers being able to formulate the budget in sufficient time for February and make sure we can do that in a balanced way. The third and perhaps final point I wanted to emphasise was just around the quality of life survey. So as members will see from the reports, and I'm delighted that Rachel Hallam, one of our policy and insight managers, is here in the room should there be any specific questions on the quality of life survey. This is our first such survey for some considerable time. This is a statistically significant, independently facilitated process by which 5,500 people were interviewed across Cambridgeshire, 1,100 people in each of the district and Cambridge city areas, to make sure that we had a statistically significant, stratified and properly segmented response from our residents about the issues that are most of concern to them. As members can see in the report, you will see some very positive issues and feedback around people's general views on happiness and quality of life. But I do think, reflecting back on some of our earlier conversations, there are some significant findings that emerge from this report that touch on issues relating to mental health, particularly relating to feelings of isolation, and I think particularly parental concerns coming through in terms of children's mental health and some of the significant points being raised there. Members will also see in the report that there is feedback on areas that don't necessarily fall within the County Council's purview, such as GP practices and other services, but that's still valuable information for our partners. We do also provide in the highlight report today and in the much more detailed information that will be published on the County Council's website, a breakdown of people's satisfaction with the various County Council services, and perhaps unsurprisingly, we see some significant feedback around the needs for further improvement around our highways service and the condition of roads. But the converse end of the spectrum, very positive feedback about the County Council's library service and registration services. You might, Chair, ask me the question, does it tell us anything we didn't already know? Well, it probably emphasises some of the things we already knew, but it actually provides us with a proper insight-led evidence base to start to make decisions about the totality of the Council's budget moving forward. I would just emphasise, though, the quality of life survey, as with any such survey, represents a snapshot of the individuals at the time they were interviewed. It is the first of what is intended to be at least 3 years of undertaking a survey of this kind, because actually this year provides us with a baseline following which we want to track the trends and the impact to see if decisions being made and our services are actually addressing what is identified. So, Chair, that's quite a lot from me, but I suspect the Executive Director of Finance and Resources might want to turn to some of the more challenging aspects of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And members will recall that last February, you set a budget and medium-term financial plan as well as a strategic framework. Clearly since then and now work is ongoing to update those forecasts and assess the budget envelope as well as costs. The table just below paragraph 2.5 identifies a gap that has increased, as the Chief Executive noted, by 7.2 million from the forecast you had in February to now £23.6 million. That is mainly due, again, as the Chief Executive noted, to inflation and service pressures. Whilst there have been some wins around some of the levels of inflation reducing, we've continued to see inflation around our high cost care packages, as was discussed earlier, increase significantly. The gap, therefore, also over the 5-year period, as inflation faces a different curve to that one projected in February, increases across the full 5-year plan to 113.8 million, noting that the 28-29 year was not in the February forecast at that point. When we compare that to draft data that is coming through from our County Council network colleagues, that is not out of kilter. And there may be further news that members will see later on this week in relation to that. So a lot of work is being put in at the moment in terms of the due diligence around this, the options for savings and how we address this. And there will be draft budget proposals come to this committee on the 19th of December. And as the Chief Executive has noted, that is highly likely to be before the provisional settlement is announced. Clearly, as part of the process, we'll also identify the prioritisation linked to the strategic framework, but also the quality of life survey just mentioned. So just focusing then on the next steps to conclude, to strengthen and continue to strengthen the governance and ensure that the service and policy committees are enabled to scrutinise these proposals. There is a table set out below paragraph 4.4 that sets out the timeline from the 19th of December to come back to then this committee at the end of January 2024, as well as noted at paragraph 4.5, there'll be further consultations with trade unions, teaching representatives, members of the public, and a number of others throughout. So I'll pause there, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Richard, and then Philippa.
Just to ask for your guidance as chair, I'd quite like to make a contribution on the quality of life survey, but you might want, I believe there's an amendment, isn't there? So you might want to sort of structure the debate. I appreciate your guidance as to how we're going to structure this debate, so I don't come in at the wrong moment and on the wrong thing.
Absolutely. I was just wondering whether we want to have any further introduction on the quality of life survey or any kind of comments on it before we move to debate. I think if we take the general debate and then take the debate on the amendment, would you be happy with that, Steve? Because I think there's quite a lot to discuss in the kind of in the round, and then we can come into the specifics on whether or not we take what we do with the amendment. I think Rachel wasn't necessarily expecting to present anything. So I don't know whether members have, I mean, just for the public, who are obviously not in the room, but a few of them may be watching online. The Quality of Life Survey has an extraordinary amount of really rich and interesting information in it. I'm sure there are elements of it that members from across this committee will want to comment on I think one of the most striking things for me was was around loneliness, and the fact that, I mean, I think we've all been aware for some time that mental health issues are on the increase across the population. What I had not expected was to find that the most extreme levels of loneliness are among our younger population rather than our older population. I think given the discussion we've just had on issues in children's social care and in fact pressures in schools, that's a thing we need to be taking note of quite carefully and thinking about what we do across all of our council services to make sure that we are serving those people well as the rest of our population. But there's an extraordinary amount of rich information in that quality of life survey. Rachel, I'm not going to put you on the spot without without questions. I think I will now come to members to make any comments or discussions on the budget process and on the quality of life survey. So I've got Richard, then Philippa, then Dan, and then Lorna. Have I got?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would echo your words. I think the quality of life survey is brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of work. It's really informative to us. It gives us a much deeper insight into what Cambridgeshire residents are saying. And there are indeed some shocking and surprising results within it. But I think this is a much deeper attempt at surveying what our residents are thinking and feeling and wanting to say back to us than we've ever done before. And I do congratulate all of those that have been involved in this survey. And I think it's now our obligation to really read, think about it and deliberate on it. And it's not one of those things. It clearly feeds into the budget process, which is why it's in this item. But it's clearly not limited to that, and it should inform our medium and longer term thinking as well as our short term thinking. And it will be very interesting to compare the results at this point next year. I think this is a quantum leap in terms of our engagement with our public, and I'm very, very proud of it. I want to, unsurprisingly, deal with issues in it around mental health because of the public health responsibilities of the committee I'm honoured to chair. And like you, I find it striking that 37% of our public have experienced mental health problems in the last year. I think it's important to say that loneliness and mental health are linked, but are not the same thing. So there's lots of people out there who are feeling lonely, but who wouldn't qualify for mental health support in any way. That's not to say it's not a problem. It's just that it's a different problem, and we have to show that we're able to respond to both. And whilst, like you, I'm really concerned most of all about young people's mental health, it is important also to say that these findings are across all age groups. It's particularly acute for younger people up to the age of 24, but it's not limited to that. And I think it's important that adult mental health across the spectrum is treated extremely seriously in terms of how we respond to the findings of this survey. I've talked with our public health colleagues about this, and the advice they gave, and I strongly support it, is that COVID has had an immense impact on this generation of young people in particular. So everyone's aware of the public debates that have been about children and young people missing out on education and whether that's been properly recompensed or not. And there's a whole concern about that in truth. But what this survey shows is they hadn't just missed out on education, they've missed out on social development opportunities that we all had as young people in schools and that they were deprived of. And then these results are the outcome of that. Not only that, I would accept, but it's a very important factor in terms of why that's happening. And we probably should be pushing as hard for how we make up that gap in terms of social development as we are in terms of education for that generation of young people who missed out. And it does echo the discussion we had slightly earlier and we need to have here about the cost of living crisis. Without getting into any argy-bargy about whose fault it is and whether we should write letters to the government, there is a cost of living crisis. this survey shows that it's of huge concern to the public within our county, and that anxiety about not being able to pay the rent or the mortgage or to feed your kids is a huge element of mental health breakdowns and concerns. And we've got to say that because that's what's going on behind this. Now, we have already in the last year brought in young people's mental health support from the Integrated Care Board and our National Health Service colleagues for scrutiny. It's fair to say that we had and have some pretty acute criticisms of the service that is provided. That isn't disrespect to those who provide it. There's some deeply committed professionals there who are trying to do the best that they possibly can. But a big part of their strategy is trying to avoid giving one-to-one support to people because they haven't got time to do it, and can they put them into groups? Well, I understand that, but I am of the view, and I think our health scrutiny was of the view, that the Integrated Care Board should just be putting more resources into mental health. And they've got really difficult decisions to take. I'm the first to say that. But this survey, I think, is calling on them loudly to do that. And it's not our job as an authority to provide health services. It is their job. And I think we need to say that today. Excuse me if I just go back to my notes. I would, however, say the work that's been undertaken by our colleague Susan van der Ven in the Health and Wellbeing Board is, I think, highly relevant to this, because we're trying in the health and wellbeing strategy to get away from just traditional ways of dealing with health and to look at social determinants of health. And the four-pronged strategy that the Health and Wellbeing Board has brought forward, with its emphasis on employment and employer response, shows that I think we are trying to deal within the ability that we have with the root causes here that can actually make a difference. But I do think, and I think it's important today, and I hope others will contribute in the same vein, I do think it's important to not just complain about the bad things that are in this survey, but to show our public that we will think about them and act upon them in response to the best of our ability. And I'd like to say this in relation to mental health in particular. I do think, and this is in consultation with the Executive Director for Adult Social Care, I do think we can do better ourselves in terms of crisis management. If you can help someone with a mental health problem at the point of crisis to stop it becoming embedded and worse, then you can actually really help. And although largely that's a responsibility of the health service, not of us, we do have some role there in terms of the point of crisis. And he and I and our colleagues are looking carefully at whether we can bring forward any proposals there. And we will hopefully come back and have something to say fairly soon in relation to that. Secondly, it is absolutely clear when we're talking about young people that family support and family intervention is really important. Young people largely don't live on their own. They live as part of family structures, and then the support given to families is a huge context, but a huge potential solution to helping those young people fall further downwards in terms of mental health difficulties. We provide support to families, that's what we do, and that's an area that we can use these results and do for better. And then we've talked often, and we will continue to talk at this committee and at the Adults and Health Committee about prevention. I happen to think that the society is doing much better at talking openly about mental health. We're taking away the stigma. I pay great tribute to the royal family on that, actually. I think they've been given real leadership that I think makes a difference because it's coming from them. But I think lots of people, including our officers and services at different levels, are contributing to that. And to the degree that we can talk openly about mental health, what I'm doing now and what we're doing now, that we can remove the stigma, and that therefore we can help people access services earlier as part of our prevention strategy, is also an important part part of our response. Two final points. In the old days, when all schools were local education authority schools, we would have been providing much more support as a local authority to them, but I'm afraid national policy changed and the funding was taken away, and now schools have to do it all themselves. And I think we try to give support, but it's not at the same level as it was in years past. And the problem is our schools are suffering themselves in terms of funding, and so accessing special mental health support is really, really difficult for them, but it's really, really difficult for us now. And it could be argued that it's not our response. It's not our responsibility to do it. I don't have the answer to that question, but I do think for our colleagues working in Children and Young People Committee on Education in particular, it's important that they ruminate carefully in terms of these findings and how between schools and ourselves we might be able to come up with some solutions. And finally, I don't really like the jargon. This is the current jargon in adult social care, co-production, everything we've got to produce jointly with the service user, not do it to them, but do it with them and then with us. I much prefer the concept than the name, okay? But the concept's a good one. And I think what this says, that for that age group of 18 to 24 in particular, we should be working with them and with individuals on what we could do, and not say we've got all the answers, but be asking them what are the answers and generally trying to go forward together. So I hope that will be another area that we can act in response to this survey. So thank you very much to all the officers that have been involved with this. Thank you to all the residents that have contributed to it. And I hope that that proves in my area, but I'm sure in other areas as well, how seriously we will take the results.
Thank you very much. Philippa.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to dive straight to slide 24, because that really summarises what we try to do as councillors, I think. And it's probably what we should show to any potential candidates as well, just to give them a warning of what's involved. That really bears close examination. Thank you for summarising so well in a nutshell, as you said on slide 24. I think this, so echo back to 17 and 18, where we saw slightly depressing results about trust. I think the trust is closely allied to a person's own experience. And I think if you look at the places where we score, on the whole, it's where people have experience of the service or even are aware of it. So people are born, die and get married. They do tend to come across the registration service. They certainly come across the bin service one way or another. Sadly, they come across the roads. And I will be returning to this at the corporate risk register. But in terms of what people know about, I'm sure I'm not the only one after years of being involved in this, the frustration of finding that people don't know what's on offer. And almost the council is the last place they look. Now, we don't have the vast advertising budget that makes sure that everybody knows where to find out about cars. Or the merits of trainers, or even now merits of the various care homes or makes of stairlift. These pop up on our phones, they pop up on our televisions, etc. We cannot compete with that, but we do need to do the best we can with the media at our disposal. And I think here the communications department of the council, working closely with councillors, can do a lot, because we need to just tell people what is available. Those of you who are on the health committee like me know I waved brochures at you last time, and that was the brochure that we receive, that we could produce to do with adult social care and services for disabilities, and also Health Watch. So yet again, if you'll forgive me, Chair, I will put in a plug for Health Watch, because that is an important bridge between the residents, the non-governmental organisations and the local authorities. And the next summit will be on mental health, particularly for young people. I think Councillor Howitt and I were the only councillors at the last one, which was a pity, because it's a missed opportunity, part of something really, really useful and helpful, and it's good to be seen at. from the point of view of people who actually do a lot of the delivery. The co-producers, they are the ones who do a lot of the groundwork, and we need to be aware of them, and they need to be aware of what we can do to help. So I think slide 24 is horribly concise summary of what we try to do day in, day out, especially when people are drawn to our attention. They come to see us or we hear about them. They are the ones in need. They're not necessarily the ones with the loudest voices shouting. And obviously, we all know that we should be looking to help the ones who most need it. That's, I think, it for now, because it does come into the risk register, as we know. I don't know whether this, just one point, perhaps it's for Rachel. Is this addressed at officers or councillors, or a bit of both?
I think definitely both.
Other assumed so, but I just wanted to check. It wasn't just an internal memo to the offices, or even something to tell us to pull our socks up. It's very much, in that case, co-production. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonas, and apologies for getting your name wrong.
No worries. Thank you, Chair. So I think it's really important to, bear with me while I get my notes up. I think it's really important to celebrate the successes in this report, and to make sure that, of course, we've got action plans to ensure that those successes continue, and don't fall off. But of course, equally, that we focus on where the improvements need to be. And one of the things that really struck me about the quality of life survey was the inequalities and the lower scores from various groups of our residents, from younger people, as we've already discussed, people with disabilities, and those from ethnic minorities. So I think it's really important that committees go away and think about how those people can be better supported and those inequalities reduced. But what I think really worries me about that is, if looking at page 101, of the report, and it's 2.9, the nice pie chart of the council's strategic ambitions. What worries me about that is that the lowest ambition, or the lowest level of investment, seems to be in reducing poverty and inequality. So 3.6 million compared to, say, 134 million pursuing the council's net zero ambitions. So I think that there's a real imbalance in the priorities and where we are investing money, and I think that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. I've just been reminded that pie chart refers to capital. So I think if you were to look at our revenue spend, it might be slightly different. On the other hand, when you look at our revenue spend, it's very dominated by social care, which obviously has an impact on poverty and inequality, but is slightly separate. Point taken. Lorna.
Thank you. The chief executive said at the beginning of this item, well, throughout the question of does this tell us anything we didn't know? And I have to say that in some respects, for me, it did. It's a brilliant piece of work, as others have said, and I'm really glad we've got this information, which is going to be an absolute goldmine of information when it comes to setting our budgets, looking at our future business planning and our priorities for Cambridgeshire. A number of messages I took away from this is, firstly, the one that Councillor King has just raised, that this is a very, very unequal county, and that if you are young, if you rent your home, if you have a disability, if you are from an ethnic minority, and if you are from a lower social economic group, your experience is much more likely to be negative. Now, that to a certain extent is obvious, but it's a really important point that needs to be borne in mind, and that we need to take with us wherever we go across the field of council policy and policy making and budget setting. The social and economic surroundings that many people live in are not good. They don't make them happy, and they contribute to all sorts of other issues, which I'll come on to in a second. The second key message for me is how widespread real concern about the cost of living crisis is for people. 86% of the county say that this is a concern. So while clearly that's going to be, it's devastating for people on very low or low incomes, the vast majority of the county feels concerned about the economic situation we're facing, the escalating cost of everything that we need, and that is also a cause for concern. And that level, that number of that percentage of the population is something that I hadn't quite recognized before, and I think now we have it in front of us. That demonstrates just how severe the crisis is that we are in. The third key message for me is one that has already been touched on, and absolutely rightly, which is about mental well-being and mental ill health, and how widespread mental ill health is. The point has been correctly made that mental ill health is not the same as loneliness. But loneliness, and this is the big thing I didn't know. If you'd said to me before this report was laid in front of us, paint a pen picture for yourself of loneliness, I think I and many other people would have drawn a mental picture of an older person on their own in their home. In fact, the vast majority of loneliness, according to this, is experienced among the young. And I think that's partly down to the dilapidation of youth provision and youth services over decades. It's also down to grotesquely poor public transport in many parts of the county. How on earth does a young person get to see their friends, get to make friends, get to have a social life if they can't drive a car? So that's the third key message out of here. And the fourth key message for me that came out to me was the high level of support, the very high level of support for more action on climate change. Still over 2/3 of people, and that's fewer than the number of people who are concerned, who are supportive of action on climate change, but still over 2/3 are willing to consider changing their behaviour. I think that there's a very real question of what changing their behaviour means and the extent to which people are willing to change their behaviour, and the things that they are willing to do and the things that they are not willing to do to contribute to carbon reduction. And for me, the secondary message from that is that depends very much on leadership from politicians. And that's a leadership that I believe that it's down to all of us to give, whatever our party political obligation, and that we cannot have a situation in which the willingness of people to act together to address climate change is undermined by politicians nationally and locally who are pulling in the opposite direction. So those for me are the four key takeaway messages from the results of this piece of work. And as I said, it's an excellent piece of work. And the thing that strikes me is that those messages and the issues that this piece of work raises for us, this is stuff we need to do collectively and corporately. I mentioned loneliness and travel. You can't just stick this in a box and say this is down to adults and health to sort out, or children and young people to sort out. All of these things, all of these big issues have repercussions across everything that we do. And therefore, I think we need as a council and as a strategy, resources and performance committee to maintain that corporate view, that collective view of these key issues, how they relate together and what we can do collectively and across our committee and officer boundaries to tackle the really big issues that this quality of life survey presents us with. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. I've got Alan, Tom and Elisa to still speak, and we haven't covered the amendment, and we have 7 minutes before Michelle is due for a break. I'm slightly hoping that we can cover the whole of this item before we need to give Michelle a break. But that will depend on, yes, Chris is right. That's a bit tight. So if people could keep their comments relatively brief, please. And I'm not quite sure how much of a debate we'll need to have on the amendment, but I am aware that we will need to come to that in a minute. So Alan is next.
Thank you, Lucy. Yes, I just wanted to touch on one thing, and I'll try and be brief. And it's been touched on that the joint administration will be using this survey to look at how they budget, how they spend the money going forward. But there is if I look at slide 24, which is Philippa has referred to, and page 134, there's one, in my opinion, one glaring omission from that, in that 76% of respondents were dissatisfied with the standard of road and pavement maintenance, yet there's no mention within that slide on page 134 as to how that's going to be tackled. And I would hope that we do use, and I accept what Councillor Howard was saying about mental health, and that's a very massive problem around the country. So I totally understand that we need to be putting money into that. I'm not saying that's not something we shouldn't be putting money into, but I do think we need to be looking at what our residents are saying, and certainly a lot of them are not happy with roads, which obviously needs money. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think there's been some excellent points. This is a really good piece of work, and congratulations to all involved. And like others, I found that there's mental health issues, particularly for young people, very troubling, and they've been through a lot. We all have, but it particularly affects them. And loneliness is almost the easier it is to communicate, the harder it is sometimes, isn't it? The more lonely people feel, and I suspect a lot of it is online bullying. Not something any of us would have probably appreciated when we were a young person, and I think that is a big factor, and certainly something the mental health challenges and issues like that. So we need to be very mindful of, and we're developing that through our work. Just a word on cost of living, household support fund, which members will be familiar with. We had a huge demand on the service during month of July. So people were not claiming for heating. Obviously, they were claiming for other factors in the cost of living. And I very much hope that when we get the autumn statement, 22nd of November, I think we were told, that the Chancellor and the government award us some more funding, because I had anecdotal evidence yesterday from Councillor Goodliffe, who chairs that committee, that actually a lot of people, if they hadn't had the school vouchers for eating, their families would not have actually been able to feed their family. So I think it just puts into perspective the troubles we are facing here. And I really think this excellent research and presentation has highlighted that. And I'm very grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, before we come to the amendment, Elisa, although Steve, Elisa and then
thank you. Yeah, sure. Thank you. This has been a wonderful piece of work to behold for many reasons. I won't repeat what's been said already. We have rightly focused on some of the things that we have learned with regard to the cost of living and what's that doing to our residents, with regard to climate change and what's that doing to our residents, with regard to loneliness and isolation and the effect that has on mental health. And I'm glad that we've discussed these in some depth. But what I'm hoping that this council as a whole is going to do going forward with this piece of work is not to overlook the extent to which, and it is my intense hope that our biggest piece of learning from this will be the extent to which these things are so incredibly interconnected, just how not isolated they are in the effect that they have on our residents. I have a speech in my pocket, which I don't intend to give today, but I will give eventually, on just the effect to which some of the ways in which the world is changing, not just societally, but also physically, the way the world is changing is having such an enormous impact on people that are increasingly close to me and to my family, and the lifestyle changes that they are having to make because, and I don't mean to be apocalyptic with what I'm about to say, but climate devastation is coming to Southern Europe. And it's not very far from us. and the amount of money that is being spent, the amount of resources that are being spent in the way that people have to look after their homes that are getting increasingly flooded in the way that they never used to before, the way that the soil is failing because it's too dry, the way that the rivers are disappearing. And all of these things have an impact on people's ability to live their lives in the way that they thought a decade ago that they were going to live it. And I don't believe that nothing like that is happening over here. And it is really very important for us as a council overall to reflect on just how different and widespread the factors are that influence the way that people can live their life in a happy and functional way as part of our society, and what as a council we need to do to make sure that people continue to consider themselves as happy and functional members of society. I am glad that the point was made that the relationship between what we can do, what we must do, what it is recognized that we should do in response to climate change, and the role that political leadership has. And I will leave that as a warning for everybody to absorb. We're all responsible for it. But it is very important for us to understand what direction overall this council is going in. I've only been in administration for a couple of years. This will be our third budget going in. This doesn't mean that you come in as a completely blank slate, but it does strike you certain things that you didn't realize, you didn't want to put into words when you weren't in charge, as it were. And one of the comments I made to some colleagues going into our first budget was the level to which I was increasingly surprised. You come into a local authority. Local authorities are by design and by definition service providers. That's what we're here for. But I was being struck, and we're talking here about late 2021 when I was making these remarks, increasingly surprised by the amount to which we are morphing into more of a welfare provider than we've ever been, or than we've ever supposed to have been. The wonderful work, and I'm glad Tom mentioned the free school meals and the household support fund and the increasing levels of revenue funding that we are having to commit to things that are welfare and not service provision. And this is really very important, and it is something. If we don't have sufficient budgetary flexibilities to be more of a service provider and less of a welfare provider, things are not going to go well for us. And we're not going to have high satisfaction levels in some of those areas where the expenditure is so much greater. So I'm not entirely sure where I'm going with this, but I do want to go together as a one council forward with this. And I do actually really hope that some of this data will focus our minds in some of the discussions that we're going to have going forward. Certainly in the way that we decide how to spend our money, but most importantly in the way that we respond to the needs that people have in our county, not the way that we thought they were, but the way that they actually are, because once you look closely, I think we will discover just how different the world is than it was about 10 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, are you going to speak on this? And then I suggest we do it all together now and we move to the, no, just the quality of life, and then we'll come to the amendment, but we'll check in a minute how many people want to speak on that before we decide about the break.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, it's you're summing up of what I'm talking on is actually one of the problems with the paper, because you said just the quality of life, and actually this is a combined paper about the business plan and the quality of life survey. And I think this council would have been far better served if we had them as two separate agenda items, one reflecting on the other, because what we've been swamped with is comments and commentary on the quality of life survey and its rich tapestry, and not on the business plan that's in front of us. There was an introduction from the Chief Executive, Stephen Moyer, where as part of that he talked about there will be cuts to services, and I must say that I find that inappropriate. I think that the decision to make cuts to services will come from the joint administration, the politicians and their decisions. there may be cuts to services, but the person who should be warming the kettle and the pot on that should not be an officer, and we should not place you in that position, Stephen Moore, even though that might be your personal point of view. It is up to politicians to say those sort of things and be held to account for them if they come to pass. The same way that I do welcome the leader already going on the radio to warm the kettles, the fact that the public will be looking at a maximum tax rate rise this year again. I find that an unwelcome message. I think it sends out the wrong message at the wrong point in time, whilst we still have time to affect things. And if you are going to go for 5%, which is what you probably said would probably happen, get it in the budgetary process. People can have to work for it, and we can we can oppose that quite early on, rather than leaving it till the last minute and then having last minute adjustments. A lot of the discussion of the Quality Life Survey has been on mental health, and I find that welcome the focus there, but the focus should have been there a year ago when we put it forward in our budget amendment that cutting the mental health budget was unwelcome, and it will prove to be the wrong thing to do. You cut it by £250,000 last year, stopping our recruitment for the potential of mental health professionals. That was a wrong decision. So was weed killing and winter gritting cuts to those that were wrong decisions, but they were cuts to services. And at least one member of your joint administration refuses to acknowledge that those are the cuts to services. And it's unfortunate that that still is being played out with the public when it's clear that those cuts to services have actually paid for political priorities that are not considered core services. The budget deficit is not entirely due to inflation and demography. It's also due to things that you've chosen to pay for that were not actually core services. It would be useful if we actually had that costed and actually presented in an honest manner to the public, rather than simply saying it is demography and inflation and lack of finance from central government. On the Quality of Life Survey, Councillor Slattery and Councillor Sharp referred to slide 24, which is on page 134. And saying, Councillor Slattery said it cuts the heart of the matter, and that position was endorsed by members of the joint administration. Councillor Sharp did actually point out what was missing. There is one slide in this entire pack where people are dissatisfied with the council services. So they are satisfied, probably 70% plus, with a lot of services, and they suggest areas where there are areas for improvement. But there is only one slide where there is dissatisfaction. That is 76% of the public are telling this joint administration that highways and the pavements their maintenance of them is simply not good enough. But I noticed, and Councillor Sharp noticed, the way that this entire Quality of Life Survey was endorsed, missing that part out, because that aligns with the objectives of this administration. In terms of the business plan, going to page 100, a lot of the costs the increased costs are actually caused by the projects that were not delivered on time. All right, we drew attention to this last year. We asked for deep dives into the energy ones in July. We keep speaking about this. Delays to project, delays to phasing, actually cost increases later on. We brought that to your attention, and instead of getting the work done in the background to see where the problem lies, we simply keep adding to the budget and saying it's an overspend. That's not good enough. And if officers are doing it in the background, we need to bring that out in the public light to see where the issues are, to see how we can fine tune things for the future. Going back to mental health, I would remind councillors, Councillor Hoy put forward a well-reported motion on the inadequacy of mental health for the young people in Cambridgeshire. And this was largely due to the proportion of spend through the NHS and not a county council function. All parties welcomed that motion. All parties supported that. And we said we would use our influence with the NHS to try and get the percentage of spend up. We can see from the Quality of Life failure, just the absolute failure in that area. I'm not talking about the failure of the county council to change the NHS, but the failure that there is serious problems with mental health going on here. And if we'd had more success there, and used our influence greater, perhaps that would have improved. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask the Joint Administration to refocus on that request that whilst we have our own responsibility for mental health, there is the NHS responsibility, and there is a lack of focus there, which we can hopefully influence through the integrated care system. The cost of living crisis is an international one. I do not need a benchmarking exercise on that one to know what's happening with the outside world. There have been various things happening in the UK which are different to abroad, but by and large, there is a massive worldwide cost of living crisis leading to rioting on the streets in various places. But if we focus on Cambridgeshire in its entirety, it does not help by automatically defaulting to a 5% council tax rise. It does not help by automatically saying that you will adjust the minimum wage to your preferred aspirations and then say that the cost of packages for residents at home have gone up. These things don't help that. It does not help when the Labour mayor introduces a brand new tax precept of £12 a year that's likely to be proposed to go up again this year, and then simply ignore things and say that the cost of living crisis is something to do with somebody else. It's up to us to focus on our own areas of concerns to see what we can highlight and actually do better. Thank you, Chair. I would add in one last comment, and that was on the free box where there was no actual questions. How happy are you? Then perhaps you could consider that last year, because how happy are you with the level of council tax? In the free box, that question was never asked, but it was actually a repeated answer. Please reduce it. So please don't automatically default to the maximum. Please consider what you do, the necessary parts, as opposed to the political priorities, some of which may prove to be unnecessary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think it is now time to give Michelle a break, so I think we will pause before we come to the discussion on the amendment. I do, however, just want to say before we move on from what's just been said that I do object to any sense that our officers would allow papers to come forward to this council that were not honest. And I don't suppose that was what you were meaning to say, and I just want to clarify that that was not what
I
you were
have
meaning
no
to say.
idea what you're talking about, Chair. Can you clarify where I said dishonest or anything like that?
I think if we check, you will, and I'm glad you've clarified that's not what you meant. So that's fine. I'm happy to take that.
Can you
That's fine.
specify the area while we're outside the room so I can address that then, please?
I am reasonably certain that I heard you talk about a lack of honesty in the way in which the papers were presented, and given that the papers are produced by our officers, I mean, I'm very happy that we've clarified it. That's fine. I'm happy to leave it there. Thank you. Let's take a break for 15 minutes. So we will return at 25 past. That's slightly less than 15 minutes. Thank you. Sorry, we're having silly conversations at this end. I think we probably need to come back to order and get on with the meeting. I know that Councillor Howett is out for a few minutes and will rejoin us shortly. He's had to take a phone call. But I think we will come back now. I'm expecting that we're going to come back and now discuss the amendment. So if you would like to introduce that, Steve, and then we can debate that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just before I move to the amendment, where we left it before the break was there's a question of whether I accused an officer of dishonesty. We've cleared that up. I was accusing a member of the administration who I didn't name at the time. I've chosen not to now. But it's up to people when they go on radio to say whether things are or aren't cuts and politically defend them, which is exactly the point I was making at the start of the debate when I said it was inappropriate for the administration to allow Stephen Moyer to be putting his head on the block for what will be an administration decision at the end of the day, one way or the other. Thank you. I'll now move to the amendment.
Just
Yes,
address
of
that
course,
very
Madam Chair.
final point about allowing Stephen Moyer. I haven't had any discussion with Stephen about what he was going to say. He is allowed to say what he likes in these meetings. Steve.
Of course, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate that. And perhaps you may wish to reflect later on with Stephen whether you wish him to say that kind of thing or whether that's a politician's role. It's not up to me to tell you how to run this administration. Moving to the amendment, it's a very simple amendment. The original proposals note the quality of life findings and how that may affect future this year's business and future budget planning approach. I've introduced the words that really ask the service and policy committees to specifically address these things, how their actions will influence it. We've had some talk during the debate already on this about how we need a corporate oversight, and I totally agree with that. We do need a corporate oversight. That's the role of the S&R committee and then the full council. However, if we don't actually ask the service and policy committees to specifically address this, then why would they actually have an action against one only for us being unable to measure it at S&R and at full council? It's not a massive piece of work. It's simply saying, these are your areas of whatever their decisions are, how does that affect this? Stephen Moyer did say in his introduction to the business planning that this quality of life survey will be useful to track how our decisions affect that. Well, if we don't know what decisions we made that are supposed to affect things, how on earth will we be able to track, how on earth will we be able to track those? And furthermore, I think it really is the committee's area. As if we take somebody like a committee like Children's is best placed to know what measures specifically Children's could do to influence things and to have discussions on that and to say we are making this decision because we hope this will have an impact in this area. S&R and full council are specifically supposed to look at the holistic, add them up together and cross-link those measures and say, actually, if we tasked a different committee to add to that, supplement that, we might have an enhanced effect. So I hope that it's well received, and it's, like I said, a very simple amendment, and it's really specifically addressed that is at the heart of that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do you have a seconder? Thank you. Do you want to speak now, Mark, or at the end?
I'm happy to hold and come back.
Thank you. Philippa.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, when I read this amendment, it looked quite sensible. And then I thought, well, actually, officers' reports already go through quite carefully alignment with policies at the end of each report. Some do it more carefully or in more detail than others. And I think that in some cases, like the one of this particular report, where we have a great deal of detail and even named officers to follow up on it, we can use the systems we already have rather than an extra bit of work at the end, or even various committees claiming to do the same thing. I mean, it might highlight duplication, but I would hope it wasn't that necessary. So I think we stick as we are, but a reasonable point, we do need to keep them in mind in the future, most definitely.
Thank you. I don't see any other contributions at this point, Steve.
Yes, thank you. I think we're simply asking for it to be an agenda item at each committee. Sticking as we are will not make that an agenda item at each committee, and will not ensure that we actually link the quality of life survey to the work of each committee. So I'm afraid, Philippa, I disagree with what you're saying and think this is just simply asking that there's some formality around addressing the concerns that have been raised in the quality of life survey, and certainly don't think it's too much to ask, Chairman.
Thank you, Lorna.
I think very simply that the formality around addressing these findings rests with this committee and with the council corporately, and that is exactly the right thing to do. And I don't think we should be seeking to ask individual committees to define and promote their own work programmes without having a very clear view about the interlinked nature of these issues and the very broad themes into which they relate. And that is what I said earlier and what I maintain. I think very much we shouldn't seek to fragment this work, but very much bring it together.
Lisa.
Very, very briefly, and I don't think actually this has been mentioned as much as it probably could have been. So first of all, this was exactly what I was hoping we wouldn't do, which is send all individual committees to go, you know, children's, you need to do something about young people feeling lonely and mental health. I mean, it's not like they didn't know. The problem is, how do we corporately as a council respond to this? Because otherwise we'll just keep going exactly the way that we have been. The other thing that is important to mention is that I don't want anybody to actually be under the impression that this work stops here. So we've done the quality of life survey. This is the data, great. We've got a baseline position now, but that's only the baseline position. You can't work just from this. You're going to have trends and response work going on through the coming months and years, and we're going to have to build that. And we can't build that separately within each committee because it's not going to work. So this isn't just a quibble. This is very, very important. We can't just keep having committees running around chasing their own tails. This is not going to work at all.
Thank you. Just one further point from me to make. I think it will be fairly clear now that we are not going to support the amendment. I do absolutely take that the amendment was intended in a positive sense, that actually there's been a sense around this whole committee that the quality of life survey has been a really valuable and important piece of work. I don't think it's the right thing to do to fragment the response to that, to go out to committees. And I also don't think it's the right thing to do for this committee to instruct other committees about what should be on their agenda plans. But also at a sort of different level, I think we need to be really mindful about the fact that many of the things that come out of this survey, while they are things that the council needs to respond to and absolutely take into account in its decision making, are not things that we can fix. We can be part of a bigger pattern across the whole of Cambridgeshire in trying to respond to the concerns that have been raised here, but we will not be able to fix the mental health issues among young people in Cambridgeshire. Actually, tragically, we're not also going to be able to fix our roads. I really wish we were. I wish there was more we could do about it. I'm sure everybody in this room does, but the scale of the challenge there and the finances that are available mean that the decline which have started under the previous administration is highly likely to continue. So we need to be really mindful about the ways in which we can respond to this and what is within our control and what is not. But I think in terms of the precise intention of this amendment, which is to send the response to this out to the service committees, I think there's been a really clear response from the members of the Joint Administration that we think that this is a corporately held document that needs to be responded to as part of the business planning process, and that's the way it's been brought to this meeting. So if we could now take a vote on the amendment. I've
got the right to
you
come
have,
in.
you have,
Thank
Mark.
you.
Apologies.
Yeah, so seconder of the motion. It's really, really interesting. First and foremost, Chair, and it's been a convivial meeting today. I think it's been good debate, a good meeting, and I don't want to spoil that. But it kind of led me to think that you guys were going to support the motion because we had all the debate on the thing. We should have debated this first. This was going to be in this position. We should have debated this first. I feel that we've actually done that wrong today, so I want that noted. I've had good fortune to visit the archives in Ely, a wonderful building. They've done really well with that. They haven't got a lot of room for more of these reports. And this is where this will finish up if we're not careful, right? We're not asking for the world here. We're asking for action on a universally debated, within the debate, was universally supported as being a really quality piece of work. Okay. And what we're saying here is, right, Chair, you just said yourself, you just said yourself, we passed earlier an agreement that we would go away and look at what we can do and not just write a letter to the chair, to government. We said that ourselves. And then you've just said, but we can't improve that, we can't improve that, and we can't improve that. Right? This amendment would actually encourage debate and conflab and whatever amongst those people closest to the coalface in each relevant department to come up with some ideas and think about what we can do. That was as simple as that. And you are right on one thing. This isn't political. This is about getting best value for money out of a fantastic piece of work that we've all, as I said, universally supported. So I'm very disappointed you're going to vote against it. It's a good job only one of your members out of the room, because otherwise that would be a really interesting one. But there you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So if we now move to the vote on the amendment, all those in favour of the amendment, if you could indicate now. That's 7, and all those against. And that's 7. So on my casting vote, I will reject the amendment. Thank you. Thank you. The rest of this report is for noting. And I think we've had a good discussion about what is an important document. So thank you for that. And we will move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the corporate risk register.
Unless I'm misunderstanding things, we've just voted on the amendment, not on item 5.
Item 5 is for noting. It doesn't require a vote. Mairead, thank you for being with us online to introduce the corporate risk register. Welcome. It's nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the report in front of you is our regular update on the Council's corporate risk register and on risk management activity. The updated corporate risk register is presented to you in full at Appendix 1 of this report. All corporate risks have been reviewed and updated by their risk owners during September and October. And Table 1 in your report sets out some key information about each of the corporate risks. So you'll see within that table that most of the residual risk scores have remained static since our previous report in July, with the exception of risk 2. That is the risk of failure of the Council's arrangements to safeguard vulnerable children and young people. And that risk score has been reduced from 20 to 15 following a comprehensive review of the risk by the new Executive Director of Children's Education and Families. The report also updates on some of the key actions which have been implemented since our last report. So at section 2.3.1, and also on the implementation of actions within our corporate risk strategy at 3.3.1. We've also brought some other updates on risk management, and particularly the work of the CLT Risk and Assurance Group, which met on the 10th of October. They reviewed the risk matrices in use, which is an action that was previously discussed at this committee and at the Audit and Accounts Committee. And the CLT group also discussed some other next steps around risk, particularly regarding the review and update of directorate risk registers and how these should be reported to committee in light of some of the recent changes to committee structures. So that's the overview, and I'm very happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you very much, Mairead. Philippa.
Yes, thank you, Mairead, and thank you for the excellent training we've also had. So I'm trying to put it into practice here, but I do need to ask a question as to about process, and that is the relationship between the service committees and the general corporate risk register, because from all the things we are all aware of the poor state of our roads and footways and the casework that is created by it, as well as our own personal experience. And I am wondering whether we are reflecting that well enough in our risk registers. 1, 2, and 7, it would seem to me, could be could be added to. We should improve. We could. The arithmetic. The numbers should be higher if we were to take into account the physical dangers to road safety of deficient or damaged surfaces, whether we're talking pedestrians, private, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and motorists. And there are so many implications for just general health and welfare and social isolation of not being able to get about safely. And in this case, it is something that is part of our statutory obligations. So I do want to see acknowledgement of that. I know that there is a massive mountain to climb, and it does lie with highways, and they are doing their best. I just wanted to know, would a contribution to the corporate risk register have to come from the committee upwards, as it were? And if my question is out of order, please do say.
Thank you. So I think there's sort of two elements to respond to that question. So firstly, in terms of the process of how a significant risk would be escalated onto the corporate risk register, that could come internally from discussion within CLT, or in this case, I think referring to highways having their own directorate risk register, where risks on that risk register reach a higher level closer to the council's corporate risk appetite, then we would expect to see that being brought through to the CLT risk meetings for escalation onto the corporate risk register. And that's certainly something that committees could discuss as well as part of their regular reviews of risk registers. In respect of the specific issue that you've raised today, absolutely, I think that is something that I, as the head of risk management, will take back now as feedback from this committee for discussion with risk owners, both risk owners within highways, so looking at how is that reflected in the Highways Directorate risk register, and also then back to our next CLT risk and assurance group to discuss actually is that reflected as it should be as part of the corporate risk register, either as a trigger to other risks as you've reflected, or whether it's of such significance that an additional risk should be added. So absolutely, that's something that can be raised at this committee, and I will then initiate the process of kind of bringing that back around and bringing some feedback on that to the next meeting and the next report.
Thank you very much. That's a totally satisfactory answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I was a little disappointed to read paragraph 3.1 about the review of risk matrices. I was pleased, first of all, that it had actually got to the CLT risk and assessment group 3 weeks ago. And it is good that items which are raised here actually get to officer working groups and are then discussed. But I can't help but feel a bit disappointed about the results of that discussion. For the sake of argument, I'll use the phrases which are used, the words used in the report about linear and weighted risk matrices, but I'll come back to that in a second. And I can't help but feel that there is a failure to follow what is increasingly happening, not merely in local government elsewhere, but particularly in the private sector, of seeing the advantages of looking at weighted rather than linear risk matrices. And the reason for that is that a linear risk matrix is in fact weighted, but it's weighted at a factor of 1. And there is no reason whatsoever why a factor of 1 rating is the most weighting is the most appropriate figure to use. Why shouldn't it be 0.8? Why shouldn't it be 2? Why shouldn't it be 0.1? Whatever. So to choose to have a factor of 1 as your weighting in establishing the values on your risk matrix is a choice in itself, and it's not a choice which is being very resolutely supported. It's almost choosing the easy answer rather than looking for the correct answer. Now, I was pleased to see within paragraph 3.1 mention made that it's going to be looked at the next meeting of the CLT Risk and Assurance Group, and looking at the two different axes on the graph to see if weighting is appropriate on one rather than the other. And I welcome that, to look at that. But ultimately, this isn't in the control, this isn't the responsibility of officers. It's our responsibility ultimately to make sure that systems are in place which are appropriate. So I'd really welcome, once a decision is made by the CLT Risk and Assurance Group, I'd really welcome the opportunity either at this committee, or if you don't have the stomach for it, at the Audit and Accounts Committee, for there to be a technical discussion about the choice which is made about the weighting for risk matrices, because it does affect the way in which the information is provided to us, and it does affect the priority given to various areas which may or may not be outside or within our risk appetite. And the second point I'd like to make is that the issue of lack of sensitivity, particularly for particularly severe events or particularly unlikely events, that lack of sensitivity still hasn't been addressed or wasn't addressed in this report. So I'd ask, when CLT Risk and Management Group talk again about the weighting that they wish to give for the risk matrices, they also consider the lack of sensitivity in the way in which we do it at the moment for the most extreme events. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's probably more questions there for me than for Mairead in terms of how we manage this. I think, just to respond to one of the points you made, I think to a certain extent it's up to us about how we respond to our risk register. It is also very much in our interest to take the advice of the people who are experts in this area. And I think in this paper that is exactly what we are doing. The senior management have reviewed this. Their advice is that it would be better for the council at present to continue with the process, with the matrix that they have. Now, you might disagree, Chris, but that's the advice that the senior management team are giving to us. In terms of the discussion about that, I think that there has been, as Philippa referred to, some training on risk, but I think I would have absolutely no problem with putting on a training agenda for somewhere for there to be a discussion around the impact that changes in the weighting might have, if that is something that the committee broadly would like, either this committee or the audit committee. I'm not going to suggest from the chair of this committee that the audit committee do anything. That is for their chair to make decisions about. But if you would like to raise that at the end of our agenda, when we discuss our agenda and our training plan, we can have a discussion about it then. So I hope that sounds a reasonable response. And I'll go to, I think, Lorna, who's next on my list.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions, quite a number of questions about this, and I really apologise to Mairead. I had meant to forward them in advance and I failed to do so, and I take total responsibility for that, but I will run through them as best I can. Do you want me to run through them as a block?
I think so, but I think it's also worth making clear to Mairead that if she would like to say that she will respond to you after the meeting with more detailed responses, that would also be fine. Is that she may be able to respond now, but if she would prefer to, then
I have previously told another officer who came to this a committee, and on being asked something said, "I don't know," how very much I admired that remark, because it is exactly the right thing to do, and I'm very happy to accept a response later. This isn't about trying to trap people into giving answers to something when they need to check things. It's my negligence, and that's my fault. First question on the risk matrices. The report says that the risk appetite of 15, the maximum risk appetite of 15, is placed on the report, but it's always placed as consequence 5 and likelihood 3 rather than consequence 3 and likelihood 5. Is there a reason for that, is my first question. The second one is a presentational one of the summary of the overall residual risk ratings from July and October, and the arrows that follow. And I'm sorry, committees always have this discussion about arrows and how they're presented, and the down arrow for risk 2, I think, means that the risk is reducing, which is good, not that the direction of travel is worse, which is bad, and it's about how we present that really clearly. I want to return to Councillor Bowden's point about the weighting of risk, because that was something I also had to talk about, and I have a fear that there is a very small and select interest group forming here of people who want to delve into the extreme geekery of risk. My note to myself was that I wanted to say that I thought that that decision was the right one. But also that it is absolutely right to continue to keep this under review, which is what the report says it will do. And I'm very pleased to see that that's happening and that we're looking at weighting, or officers are looking at weighting the other way. And it's a reminder to members that we mustn't just concentrate in a blinkered way on the numbers, as if a 15 as opposed to a 14 is the absolute truth. We've got to look at these things in the round and consider them not just numerically, but in all their full glory. But I shall be fascinated to see, and I'd love to hear, seriously, I would love to hear about the results of consideration of weighting the other direction, and to see more information about the geeky details of this, because it is actually important. My next question was about page 149 and the reasonable control it gave there on rigorous risk management discipline embedded in services and projects. And I wondered whether, sorry, I will go back so that I can squint at the screen and see which one. This is risk 3. The council does not have enough budget to deliver agreed short and medium term corporate objectives. And that control number 9, rigorous risk management discipline embedded in services and projects, was reasonable. What is it that would take that to good, and are we doing all that we can there? Similar question on risk 4 and the trajectory there for those controls currently judged to be reasonable, and the same question on risk number.
Lorna, could you speak up slightly?
Number 5. Sorry, it's risks 3, 4, and 5, and what can be done, what is being done to move that trajectory for adequacy of control in a more positive direction.
Do we want to put, how many more have you got? Because
I'm sorry, I did.
I know you did say, but I'm just checking.
I've got 3 more.
Well, maybe we'll pause there and let Mairead come back on those ones, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you, Mairead.
Thank you. I'll do my best to answer the questions that you've raised so far. So firstly, the question around the risk matrices and the fact that we show the council's risk appetite as being likelihood 3 and consequence 5, and that being the score of 15, rather than showing the consequence 3 and likelihood 5, which would also be a score of 15 and which would also represent the council's risk appetite. It's a really good question. I think the answer is because we felt that it would look too cluttered to kind of have so many different points on the risk matrix, essentially, because then you've got the X for the score, sometimes the T for the target, where the intention is to reduce the risk, and then 2 risk appetites. So I think we felt that it may just become a bit visually confusing. However, if the committee would prefer to see both kind of extremes of the risk appetite represented, then I'd be very happy to make that change for future reports, because it is the case that either 15 would fall within the bounds of the council's risk appetite. Similarly, in terms of the presentation of table 1 and whether we show a down arrow as good and how we could do that, I'd be happy to perhaps put in some red, amber, greens to show whether a direction of travel is a positive thing or a negative thing, if that would help. But certainly I can take that away and have a look at how we present that and how to make it clear kind of what does good look like in that table. With regards to some of the specific questions on risks, so risk 3, control 9 around risk management in projects, the reason that that is currently rated as reasonable rather than good relates to the ongoing work that's being undertaken to develop a new project management framework and project management approach. within the Strategy and Partnerships Directorate. And once that is in place, that should give more detailed guidance to officers on risk management specifically within the project environment. Similarly, within risk 4, there are some controls rated reasonable which reflect ongoing work. So there is an ongoing action around IT disaster recovery planning, and there is also a significant piece of work going on currently within the emergency planning team to conduct a full refresh of business continuity plans across the authority. And therefore, once those actions have been implemented, I would be expecting to see those controls improve their rating from being a reasonable control to a good control. And then risk 5, similarly, it links back to the implementation of the performance management framework, which is still in the process of implementing the new framework and the new corporate key performance indicators. And again, I would expect that once that key action is completed, we would see that control improving up to a good.
Thank you very much indeed, Mairead. Lorna, back to you.
Thank you. Then I suspect that Mairead's answers to the latter questions there will also be the answers to my questions about risks 7 and 10. So I'm happy to make that assumption and take that up with Mairead separately. The last question I had then was about risk 8 and the council is a victim of cybercrime and the consequence of that being only 3. How confident are we of that?
Are you, Michael, do you want to pick that one up?
It's just checking in case Mairead was coming in. I mean, in terms of consequence, we have a policy that we will not pay any ransom. In terms of a consequence, we have disaster recovery in terms of backup, and in terms of data lost, we'd be looking at days, not months, and obviously data held. So we've gone through the kind of position of each of the factors that we consider in terms of financial governance, reputation, to come up with that level. And happy to talk outside in more detail if wanted to, because likewise I'm a techie when it comes to risk management.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that looks like that's Lorna's questions done. So that's very good. I'm going to go to Alan now and then Mark.
Just one question, basically. It's on risk 2, and I may well have missed something, but it's moved from a previous score of 20 down to 15, and I know we've had a long discussion previously about the huge financial pressures that area is facing. So I'm just slightly surprised that risk has reduced.
I think I'm going to come to Stephen on that one. I think I can guess what some of the answers are, but it's better to hear them from Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, a question for the Executive Director for Children, Education and Families as the owner of the risk. 2 comments or observations in response. Whilst we focused on the financial discussion around the costs earlier, I think in terms of the sufficiency or the effectiveness of the safeguarding arrangements, 1, no longer unregulated placements. So that's first of all a helpful step. 2, as you will see from the corporate performance scorecard, reducing turnover in staffing levels and improving recruitment and retention for qualified children's social workers. And I think more broadly, in terms of our work to review the multi-agency safeguarding hub and the integrated front door for children's social care with the police, with the NHS, with Peterborough City Council, significant improvements to process. So whilst I talked about increasing volumes and increasing cost, the robustness of the arrangements to manage that, other than the money and the sufficiency financially, are certainly significantly improving. That's Martin Proudbrick's formal assessment based on the risk at the moment. Financial impact is obviously only one of the factors that is referenced in the risk as resulting in the overall score. Thank you.
Just to say thank you for that explanation, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a good question, Alan. So thank you. Mark.
Can't guarantee mine is, because on the basis there's no such thing as a stupid question, I find myself struggling to understand, and I'm sure there's a valid explanation, which is what I'm asking for, that 11 of the 12 risks have all been reviewed in the last couple of weeks, but risk 6 hasn't been reviewed since March. Can somebody help me understand that, please?
Stephen again.
Chair, I can easily clarify that one for Councillor Goldsack. I think there's an unfortunate error in the table in the covering report. If you look at the specific risk in the appendix, you'll find that it was reviewed on the 5th of October.
Another good answer. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I also want to focus on risk number 2, which Councillor Sharp has already picked up. This is the failure of the Council's arrangements to safeguard vulnerable children and young people. So the first point I'd like to highlight is what actually happens in 2.1.2 in terms of a paper to us. So it says the only risk on the corporate register showing a change has been reduced, and the reduction follows a comprehensive review of the risk by the new executive director. If we're the ones that are sort of looking at the risks and approving the risks and then notified of changes of risk, then I would have far rather had the sort of comprehensive explanation we've just received by interrogation through Stephen Moyer than actually this, the officers know best, we've changed it, and, you know, just take it as read. So, you know, there is some thinking behind this, but it's our role to check that thinking. And so I'd prefer much more comprehensive answers. In terms of where I was going with this, it was because I wanted to test that thinking and also comment on, it wasn't just finances when we were talking about the children's earlier. We were talking about changes to government legislation. We were talking about a review that was recommended that government turned down. All of those has happened. There's lots of things apart from finance that have happened as a backdrop. And yet at the same time, we're told to be really concerned by all that, write a letter to government is a request. And in the meantime, we say, but the risk of likelihood of this happening has gone down in the council. If I look at the likelihood factors, if I take one, for example, need for the council to implement the demands of the safety valve principles. Yet on page 43 in the pages of planning for the business planning, it actually highlights that we're behind. We need to get those costs down, and we actually need a program to actually deliver those, which means that there will be some cuts to provision for our most vulnerable children. So I'm very concerned that on the one hand, we're saying we're less likely to do it, but the actually likelihood factors elsewhere in the paper and in conversations are actually higher. We know that we've also talked about the difficulty in procuring home to school transport for SEND children. So that is another likelihood factor that is existing really high, and we don't know why it's gone down. So there's an overall package there. I'd like a fuller briefing from the director, perhaps by email, if possible, to this group to really explain how that likelihood has gone down. Whilst on the subject of likelihood and potential consequences, and this is any risk, but I'm going to use the one that we're on as an example, and I think it was highlighted by the valuable question from Councillor Dupre, and I think there may have been a different understanding from the officer, or there is a different understanding from me, but the question was basically, why is it always 5 and 3 and not 3 and 5, I think was the question. And if we take a consequence, and this would be a typical consequence as opposed to a likelihood, the consequence of everything failing would be a child dying. You cannot get any higher. I mean, it's simply as bad as that. I'm actually surprised that we don't actually go so far with our language to really underline that. We say the potential maximum harm is harm to a child. That harm could result in death. So the consequence, even with the best run council in the world, with all the safeguards in place, if something went wrong, a death would be a 5, it'd be a consequence. There's nothing you can do about the consequence should it happen. So that's why in some cases it will always be a 5. In terms of the likelihood, that is the things that lead to that, the potential for that to happen, and the measures that we can put in place. Have we got adequate safeguarding? Have we got enough staff, etc.? So that could go from 5 down to, we could go down to 1 if we was perfect. We're not, but so that is my understanding of why it's always 5 and 3 and never 3 and 5, because we really can't affect consequences as much as or accept them, whereas we can affect the likelihoods. So I hope that was helpful. That was my understanding of the question, and yeah, I would really like to know more before I accept that we really have gone down from 20 down to 15 on this score. I would comment that I know that there's an Ofsted review coming here. It'll be interesting to see if they back up the council's self-assessment, considering we've also got Essex County Council working alongside us to improve matters. So whether they will agree that that we have sufficient arrangements in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Chair, if I take the first part of Councillor Count's questions and then I'll defer to Mairead on the more technical aspects around the scoring. I'm sure we can happily take an action for the Executive Director for Children, Education and Families to provide a briefing outside this meeting. I would also just want to clarify that Martin's assessment of risk is obviously slightly less contemporary than some of the other papers we're receiving today. So I think this is part of the challenge. And Councillor Bowden and I think in another committee have had this debate before. Our risk register is retrospective in effect rather than contemporary in real time. So that's part of the challenge for any risk methodology. However, very happy for Martin to pick up and give a fuller explanation outside the committee. I will defer to Mairead on the actual scoring and which applies when. Thank you.
Thank you, Mairead.
Thank you. So absolutely agree. The reason that we have reflected the 5 consequence against 3 likelihood as being the risk appetite is because arguably that is the more severe position where you do have a consequence of 5. Equally, the other, the converse, the 3 consequence by 5 likelihood would still represent the limit of the council's risk appetite, but we don't show that within the matrix because we choose to show the other position. We could look at whether we amend that or whether we just retain the 15 as being 5 consequence by 3 likelihood.
Chris.
It's kind of you to allow me to speak again, Lucy. Thank you. I've just been struck by the very interesting contributions, both from Councillor Count and from Councillor Dupre. And it appears that there is, it's more than just I who is concerned about some of the methodology which is involved here. It has been suggested that this may be a rather specialised area of interest, and I understand what's meant by that. And just as a constructive thought to you, and you don't need to give an answer straight away, but maybe setting up a working group which wouldn't be an official committee, but would allow those of us who have an interest in this to explore it further with officers might be an appropriate way forward.
Thank you, Chris. Noted. I think that's been a good discussion. Thank you very much indeed, Mairead, for your excellent answers to the many questions you've been faced with. I do just want to make one point on the on risk 2, which has been a lot of our discussion today, and I think is a really important one to look at. I just want to flag up the distinction between what we're looking at in risk 2, which is the arrangements to keep children safe, versus what we were discussing in the budget papers and in the integrated finance report, which is the cost of keeping children safe. And obviously there is a relationship between them, because if we don't have the financing in order to make sure that we are sufficiently funding our social workers and our SEND management and all of those things, it will have an impact on the safety of children, but they are not the same thing. And this risk is very specifically about the safety of children. I think it's been a really good discussion. Thank you very much for your answering of our questions, Mairead. This report is for noting, so I think we have thoroughly noted it, and we will come back to the discussion on the further conversations about the intricacies of risk weighting, I think, under our agenda plan item. So thank you very much, Mairead. We will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the corporate performance report. And I will just find out, this is being presented by Sue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it's the performance report on behalf of Strategy and Partnerships and Finance and Resources for Q1 for 23-24. We just pull out in the cover report just some highlights from the appendices, which obviously details where we are in terms of all our performance indicators. I just wanted to note that I know we often focus on the red indicators quite rightly, but that a total of 50% of the indicators reporting to this committee are green, which is on target, or blue, which exceeds the target. And we've just selected a couple of those KPIs to highlight in the cover report. The first one being about exceeding our target around social value with suppliers, and we've exceeded that in the last quarter, in quarter 1, and also our quality assurance score on our website, where we've exceeded the target. The red indicator is one which has been discussed in committee previously, relating to late waivers, and we have pulled from the appendix the details around those individual waivers so that you've got that information in the report as well as in the appendix. I just want to say that our head of procurement continues to work with all officers, particularly senior officers, and she has again put in place further discussions with directorate management teams and executive directors to ensure that compliance with contract procedure rules is understood across the council. So that diligence in that area continues. And the other red indicator is the introduction to first aid indicator, where we are still aiming to hit our target of 3,000 by the year end. The report asks you to note the performance information in the report, but also to note and to comment on the recommendations to transfer some of the KPIs to the Asset and Procurement Committee. And those details are set out in paragraph 2.3.3. So if you've got any questions on the report or the appendix, Michael and I will do our best to answer them. And if we have to say, I'm sorry, we don't know, we'll take it away to the relevant service colleagues in order to be able to answer those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. Yes, again, indicator 169, the percentage of contract waivers submitted fewer than 5 days before their proposed start date. We're told that the performance has declined again this quarter, and we're also told that the figure for this quarter is too high. And it's something which has been, I've raised more than a few times now in these meetings, and action has been taken. We've got we've established a procurement pipeline to be able to try to address these issues in good time in future, and various instructions have been given to officers. Nevertheless, we find ourselves with these poor results. And I'm struck when looking at some of the councils which have gone into serious financial difficulties and on occasion have ended up with Section 114 notices, that very often it is poor governance. In fact, more often than not, it is poor governance which is at the heart of their difficulties. And having an excess number of waivers connected to the procurement process, connected to contracts, is itself a sign of poor governance. Now, unfortunately, we will never be in a position of being able to get 0 waivers. Well, theoretically we could, but in practice we won't, because there will always be those exceptional cases where something happens at the very last minute, where it's just impossible to avoid having a waiver. I fully accept that. Nevertheless, it's disappointing that we have figures which are described here as declining and still being too high. And I do note the lengthy list of actions which are listed in the report to seek improved compliance waiver approval. And I'm pleased about that, but I just wonder, when are we actually going to see the results of what we're trying to achieve here? And I feel like a broken record saying the same thing again and again and getting the response, we're taking action, and then we get a set of figures like this in front of us. And what's I do ask that we need to see results here in terms of a reduction in terms of the numbers of waivers which are granted. And given it was interesting to read the examples given, and I'm grateful that examples were given, but very often it didn't explain why they were late applications which had been made. They explained maybe the urgency, they explained the importance of them, but not necessarily why it ended up being a late application. In one case, it made it quite clear why it was late, but in other cases it didn't. So I would have appreciated slightly more information than that, but I'm grateful for what information we received. In the light of this failure, and it's a continued failure, it seems ironic that this indicator, 169, is one which is being proposed not to carry on coming before this committee, but just to go to the Assets and Procurement Committee. And whilst I understand it's embarrassing, I think it's actually rather important for this council that this particular indicator is concentrated on very closely, and that we see that the numbers go down. So I'm disappointed that it's being almost relegated to the Assets and Procurement Committee rather than staying with this committee.
Thank you. I'll let Sue come back, but I do just, or in fact, Michael come back, but I do just want to say I don't think going to the Assets Committee is relegated. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I think just pulling out the comment related to the authorities with the governance in relation to the 114s, I think they're related to large scale commercial, but I do get the point around good governance starts with counting the pennies as well. So actually having this and reporting this is healthy. I think one of the recommendations from the last Asset and Procurement Committee that we took this indicator also to recommended that this was put in context of the number of contracts that were awarded, because what you just have here is a straight number rather than the overall context in terms of the level of contracts that the council is being awarded. Take Councillor's point about more information, and we continue to expose this in terms of its entirety to the Assets and Procurement Committee. We had a very good conversation in terms of the types and nature of reporting of this indicator there, including, for example, whether this was a sole supplier, and that was the reason, which is the case in one of these that's not put down there. And you'll note that one of the applications was rejected by myself as I didn't think it was urgent. So we are pushing back to the business, but I think it's that context in the overall scale, because I think we will never get away from zero waivers. I think these things happen and they're there for a reason. And the head of procurement has recently reminded all of the senior executive and leadership team and management team of the purpose and types of waivers. So this will continue, but I think put it in terms of that context of greater reporting, as was discussed at the Asset and Procurement Committee, is the way forward.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on 3.1 and the transfer of the EPMO or SPMO to sit under this committee. I was wondering if I could ask either for a paper on it, if we've got one coming to explain it, or possibly maybe better, a fairly short member survey to actually update us on, sorry, not a member survey, a member seminar, just to update us on the workings of it. I'm probably in a smaller minority than Chris and Lorna in being very interested in project and program management, as opposed to I don't fit that bill in your risk world. But I would be very keen to understand how that now works. And as much as everything's moved to Project Online, that remains a reporting tool, and is no more. So like most things on there, quality in, quality out, it's the procedures and policies that we're following around it that are of particular interest. And if we relate that back to many of the discussions we've had in this meeting today about quality, time, cost, quality, and where we're at on projects, I think you'll see where I'm coming from in asking for that information.
Thank you. Yeah, Sue.
Yes, thank you very much. And yes, absolutely. We're delighted that following the restructure of the programme team earlier this year, that we have been able to get that all the portfolio of programmes into that reporting tool in terms of the corporate performance. We are bringing some information to the corporate leadership team in the next few weeks about some of the development of our performance reporting corporately that then will enable us to flow through into this committee with improved performance. I think in terms of, we've also had some new members of staff, so a new assistant director who's responsible for policy, insight and programmes, who started in mid-September, and also a new portfolio manager. These people were recruited through the restructure, but obviously one was coming from another authority, and also the lady who's our portfolio manager was returning from maternity leave. So we've actually strengthened the leadership
in this area to be able to take that forward. I know I'd be very happy to take that away and look at what we could do for members in terms of discussing where we are in our consideration of strengthening our performance reporting around our programmes and projects off the back of actually getting things into a system, and also just talk that through with those members who are interested in that. Yeah, very happy to take that forward.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. That's great. So will you send out a note on that? After
I
the
will do,
meeting?
yes.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of performance indicators I want to comment on. The first one is the staff feeling valued, which is slide on page 118, and it's just under 60% those feeling valued. We can flip that on its head and we could say that's 40% probably feel undervalued, although that's not the question, so we can't necessarily do that. I'm concerned that actually it's 54% of respondents. So if we jump to a conclusion and say that's 40% were unhappy, and another 46% of the people didn't actually respond, probably because they're unhappy, we could jump to 72% unhappy. We don't know, because that's not how the question was asked, and we didn't get a full response. This was July 21. I do like the ambition and the target to go upwards, but it would be useful to make more out of the how many people responded in this, so that we know next time, because annual survey, I believe, and the year after, et cetera, how valuable the figures are, as well as the actual figure. We'll start to get a feeling for how valuable the figures are. But the reason I was looking at that is because really it relates, as does sickness, health and turnover figures, to the big problem both at this council and other councils, although I have never seen the benchmarking that I've asked for many times as to what the problem is with recruitment. We're all told there's a problem with recruitment and retention, but I'd love to know how we compare to other councils. But if I look at our staff turnover, which is a valuable measure on page 196, it seems to be heading in the right direction, but I want to pull out some specifics. And I also want to make a request that with the chair's permission, officer's permission, there may be a way that we improve the value of this slide in its presentation. So it's heading in the right direction. We see that in the small print on the left. We discover that that the turnover of those in the first 12 months of service was 10% out of the 12.4. And the remainder had an average term of 6.44 years. So they were they'd been with us for 6.4 years. Further information, actually, apart from those retiring, it's 4.6. It would be really valuable to track the 12-month figure and the 4.6-year figure. The reason for that is if we improve the 12-month figure, we will see a knock-on effect with the second one, and therefore we should see a knock-on effect overall. If we improve the 12-month figure and don't get an overall improvement overall, then we're messing up with the people that have been with us for a longer period of time. So what I'm saying is the usefulness of this slide could be improved, which is just a request from me. And actually, I note that we appear to be going in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's noted. Stephen.
Chair, thank you. Just in response to Councillor Accountant, perhaps for clarity on indicator 187, the proportion of staff feeling valued. It may not be apparent from the commentary included in that slide, but just to clarify, the figure of 59% engagement is the figure from June 2021, as I think you referenced. Just to confirm, the council completed a full and independent whole workforce survey, which is the 54% response rate in the commentary. That is well above the norms for any sort of whole workforce survey in terms of response rate. And as the commentary states, we'll be actually bringing a much fuller report, which is benchmarked against other public sector bodies, to members to consider. And that's indicated that will be available within Q4 of this financial year. So there's actually a much richer picture and much more information on how staff feel valued by the organisation that is due to come forward. On the points around the recruitment, retention and turnover figure, I would agree it does appear to be moving in the right way, but presentationally, yes, we can pick that up with the HR team. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. I'm just going to draw attention to one of the indicators that I think hasn't been mentioned, which is indicator 206, which I will need to skim down again and find, which is the number of local companies that we're employing. And I think it's an amber indicator. I think it's a new one. And I just wanted to say how pleased I am that it is there and how interesting it will be to monitor the amount of our spend that is going into the local economy in the future. So thank you for adding that indicator. It's really helpful. I think that's the end of the discussion on that. And I think that report is also for noting. So I don't think we need to vote on it. Do we need to vote? No. That's very good. So we will now, unless you've got anything you want to add, Steve. No. We will move on to item 8 on the agenda, which is the amendment to the local government pension scheme, which is being presented by Sarah. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, good afternoon. So we are seeking approval from committee today to make an amendment to our local government employer pension discretion policy. And this is specifically in relation to shared cost additional voluntary contributions. Currently, our employer discretion policy states that the council does not contribute to any shared cost AVCs for employees. What we're seeking to do is amend that position. The updated wording is given in 2.3 of the report, but specifically amending that discretion to say that we will contribute to a shared cost AVC via a salary sacrifice arrangement, specifically for a salary sacrifice arrangement. The reason that we're seeking to do this is to introduce a new employee benefit for our workforce, for members of our workforce who are in the local government pension scheme. And this is to give them the opportunity to pay into an additional voluntary contribution, so an additional benefits pot that they build up alongside their local government pension. And by doing that in a shared cost salary sacrifice arrangement, they receive tax and national insurance savings on the amount that they sacrifice from their salary. So essentially it's a way of people building up that additional pension benefit while achieving tax and national insurance savings on that money that they have paid in as additional voluntary contributions. The other benefit to this approach is there is an employer saving associated with this. So it's a 14.3% national insurance, employer national insurance saving that is made on the amount that an employee has chosen to sacrifice from their salary to pay for those additional voluntary contributions. That's kind of an overview of the approach. I would very much welcome questions on this one.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Sarah. And I understand it's your first time presenting to the committee, so thank you for presenting it very well, and it's very nice to have you here. I think Stephen wants to say something, and then I'll come to Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly echoing that point that you've just made. Obviously, if members weren't aware, this is Sarah's first time presenting a report committee, and I think she's done commendably well. I'm also conscious some members may have raised technical questions in advance of the meeting, which I believe she's responded to. In terms of the presentation of this discretion for us as an employer, and I differentiate that very clearly from the way the pension fund is administered, additional voluntary contributions like this are tax exempt, as members may be aware, because it follows similar rules to other salary sacrifice schemes. And this is a benefit that's already offered by a number of other councils, which we think is something that would be of huge benefit to our workforce as a whole, both from a recruitment perspective, but from a retention one as well. And finally, Chair, just so I'm being crystal clear, I have no conflict of interest in this matter. I am not a current member of the local government pension scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, I think you had your hand up. Have I made that up?
I did, but I don't need to ask my question now.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments, or Edna?
Yes, thank you very much. That was really excellent. Just to say that this seems like a really admirable and welcome addition to the offer to staff, and I'm very supportive of it. And I do offer my apologies because I have to leave to another committee meeting now.
Okay. Can I just check whether there's going to be any concern about whether we pass this before Edna goes?
I think your numbers are okay.
Thank you. That's fine. Thank you, Edna. That's reassuring. Steve was next.
Yeah, terrible, Mark. Terrible, Mark. You should not have done that. Just remind Chair, you have the casting vote of its side. But there isn't a problem. I just wanted to reflect. I sent a number of emails forwards and backwards to Tom Carey and Sarah, and I want to thank you for putting up with me getting to the bottom of my misunderstandings or potential causes for concern for this one. It was an extensive piece of correspondence that I managed to get undone with officer support beforehand. I'm comfortable with this. And I'll be supporting it. Just in terms of conflict of interest, I'm what's regarded as a paid up member, unfortunately. One of the saddest things I think was when this was introduced, which was the current government, to stop members from being able to join this pension scheme. Now, I know that I was the leader at that point in time, and whether people believe me or not, I was probably doing 60 to 80 hours a week. It was physically impossible for me to have another job if I wanted to continue doing this, and I was subsidizing this by choosing not to do other things, and whether people believe that or not, that's up to them. So to be told that you can't do that and save your pension in this way, I was upset, and I don't think it was the right decision. I hope that one day, whichever government comes in, they really look at the value that all members can add to the local government authority. But yeah, in terms of this one, I bottomed it out with officers. I had concerns at the start. We got to the end of that. Happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. And just to say, I could not agree with you more on the pension stuff as somebody who suffers very much from that, Steve. And
Chair, actually, if Councillor Count will forgive me, I wanted to say I endorse his comments entirely. I actually think members being prohibited from joining the scheme is a barrier to people coming into elected office. It's regrettable. Scotland still allow elected members to be members of the scheme. Wales offered discretion through the government to enable authorities to make that decision. Sadly, it would appear only England is in the situation where members are no longer eligible to join the scheme. My personal view, and again, in endorsing what Councillor Count said, I think that is a mistake that could be amended, hopefully, in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Coming back to our staff, which is who this is actually about, I don't see any other questions. I think this is a really positive thing for us to be able to offer them. It's really positive for our staff and slightly positive for the council. But I think that the more we can encourage our staff to make use of this, the better, because it is really important and helpful for them. Alisa would like to ask a quick question.
Just very, very quickly. I was a member of the pensions board, not the committee in the past administration. This is something I've always felt. I tried very hard not to be out of my depth. I kind of was. And I miss it, I have to say. It was very interesting insight into things that really qualify behind the scenes. I don't want to spoil the atmosphere of consensus that has just been created. But I think we very frequently forget the impact that the pension scheme and satisfaction with the pension scheme and what's happening with the pension scheme has on our recruitment and retention and staff satisfaction level. And I was wondering, I'll leave this for the officers to consider, whether there's anything we can do in terms of providing easy to understand briefings to members and the wider community about what scheme members think, how their feedback is used, and what lessons there are for us, because I have a feeling that rather a lot more people than I hope feel out of their depth when thinking about pension schemes.
Thank you. I think maybe I'll leave that as something to be picked up by officers. It's clearly outside of this particular paper, but I think for all of us, understanding pensions is important and not always straightforward. Thank you very much for presenting this to us, Sarah. I think you've done an excellent job. We will, I think, move to the vote on it. All those in favour of the recommendations, if you could indicate. Lorna, are you voting? I think that is unanimous. No, we don't. But I'm very grateful to all of the members who have stayed to vote on that because it's really important and helpful for our staff. So thank you very much, Sarah, and happy birthday. Thank you. Right, and I think we now come to the last bit of our agenda, which is normally very quick, but we might want, well, given that how long we've been, we may not want to spend very long on, which is our agenda and training plan and the appointments to outside bodies. And this is for Michelle to introduce.
Yes, the only two things that I'd like to draw your attention to is in relation to the training plan. We do have a briefing on the impact of a cyber attack on the council on the 7th of November, which we encourage all members to attend via Teams. And on the 29th of November, there is procurement training for members. Again, this is taking place on Teams.
Thank you. There was some discussion earlier about other things we might want to add to the agenda plan or the training plan. And I also have something I want to raise that we might want to add to the agenda plan. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I will take up your offer of discussing this now. I have been overwhelmed by the amount of interest that has been shown by so many members of this committee in the subject of the risk matrices that we've got. And considering that, I just wonder whether I think it's more appropriate for me to approach the chair of the Audit and Accounts Committee and to ask for it to be looked at in that committee rather than this one. It has to be said the Audit and Accounts Committee operates in a very politically impartial way. And it's not a party political matter, as was made quite clear from the comments made from Lorna. It's not party political, but it does involve a large amount of detail, and maybe Audit and Accounts is a better location.
Okay, that's great. If you do pick it up with the Audit and Accounts Committee and they are offering some training and some work on this, then it might be worth making sure that members of this committee are also informed about it. But I'm very happy for that to happen there. The other thing that I was wanting to raise on our agenda plan is that this committee has a slightly new remit now, and part of that remit is on partnership scrutiny of our partnerships. And I think that there has been a desire and sometimes a need to discuss things which are going on among our partners at this council. The only space where that really happens is at full council. Rob Bridge, who is the chief executive of the Combined Authority, has been visiting a number of different councils recently since his appointment, and I think it would be possible to invite him to come and speak to us and put that on our agenda plan. It would also be possible to invite other partners, potentially including the Greater Cambridge Partnership, to come for a discussion. My suggestion is that we might want to invite Rob to come to December. I think we would not want to invite anybody to come to our meeting just prior to the budget, but then we could potentially look at another space for one of our partners to come to our, I think our March meeting, is that when it would be? So I don't know what the views of the committee on that would be. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit concerned because our partner in that remit, this is the member forum for discussion, policy, etc., and our partner is the mayor. You know, the officer, Rob Bridge, although it would be lovely to have a chat with him about how he handles finance and the matters of detail like that, it's really our member's role is more concerned with the mayor. Could you invite the mayor instead and then ask officers to take up the kind I invite at officer level?
I could potentially do that, or invite them both. Richard.
Different point. As you know, because we've discussed it privately, for us to make this new role of the committee successful, all depends on how well prepared we are in advance to ask questions. I'm looking at Michelle here, who's been helping us with her colleagues on health scrutiny. And I'm fully in favour of this. I think this is really going to be an improvement. But I think there will be a responsibility on us to be well prepared in terms of, and look at the opposition as well as the administration on that. So having some sensible discussions in spokes in advance would be one area for that, but also within our political groups. But also, and this is aimed at the officers, I think having an officer report drawn up by our own officers on what we as the county council are trying to do in the various partnerships, what are the current issues for us, where we're seeking to realise outcomes, that if that appears on the agenda paper, at the time we're going to have the discussion with the partner, that can make sure we're as fully informed as possible, and we can then also receive the benefit of our own officers' advice and recommendations about where we should be pushing and prodding. So I just made both of those points.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So I think that there's, I mean, we can pick this up in spokes if that would be easier about how we manage this. I don't know. I think maybe we'll investigate whether I'll come to Mark and then we'll.
Just this point, and it's leading on from what Richard just said, which I think made a lot of sense. I'm sitting here and I'm trying in my head to say, could I name who our partners are? And I'm not even sure I could. So, and I don't know to where you're referring. I get the CPCA, I get the Greater Cambridge Partnership. Are we talking about the NHS? Are we talking about? Do you see where I'm going with this? So actually, I think some form of officer-led introduction to the area would be most welcome, and then I think that would help us set an agenda plan for visits, which I think would also be most welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to take that. Let's take that as our starting point rather than starting by inviting people. I mean, I think that some of our partners get scrutinised by other committees. So health, for example, have their specific space where they are scrutinised. But I think that sense of let's have an officer report and from our own officers and an internal discussion about the programme before we start with invitations. I'm happy to take that up. So perhaps we will put that on the agenda for December, and then we can work out what to do after that. Thank you. That's really helpful. Good. I don't see any other questions on the agenda or training plan. As far as I'm aware, that's the end of our business for today. And so I will now declare the meeting closed and thank you all very much for staying to the end. Thank you.